Makati Productions presents Star Wars Legacy's Edge. Conjunction. Written by Gregory O. Scott. Nothing goes as planned when Ben Skywalker leads a team of Jedi against a group of Outer Rim marauders. Chapter 1. 5 TIE fighters, arranged in tight phalanx, howl through the sky. A Pallet Lambda-class shuttle followed, then 2 narrow rectangular Y-4 armored transports. As the TIEs broke formation to circle the city, the shuttle folded wings and extended struts for landing. The transports split apart, one going east, one going south, and they fell out of view behind the roofs of stout 2- and 3-story red brick buildings. The shuttle descended into the heart of the town and settled on the aged-gray flagstones of the central plaza. All the while, TIE fighters screamed in the distance. It was like something out of a history documentary, Kadia thought as she watched from a window on the far corner of the plaza. When the shuttle dropped its landing ramp, twin columns of a dozen stormtroopers each descended with rifles clasped to chests. Pure Imperial shock and all. But when she got out her macro binoculars and looked closer, the illusion broke. The troopers didn't step in time as they marched. Their armor was battered, often poorly fitted, and of a design the Empire had long since replaced. That Lambda shuttle had clearly seen better decades too. What finally killed it was the leader of the bunch. His 2.5-meter frame was encased in the black leather outfit of an old-style Imperial gunner, but he wore no helmet, and the head atop those broad shoulders was markedly reptilian, complete with green scales, jutting snout, and fang-lined mouth. Shakai Din, Kadia smiled as she peered through the binoculars. Jackpot. What? Asked the voice behind her. What did you say? Kadia tore her attention from the show on the plaza. The man standing behind her looked like a lot of Paradine's older citizens, human, thick hair gone white, skin tanned and leathery from years under a hot sun. Shakai Din, she repeated. That's the one in charge. Though they were far from the shuttle and soldiers, Sefton approached the window cautiously. Kadia held out the binoculars, but he only said, You mean the lizard one, don't you? He's a Soren from Dirkdeal. It's near Wookiee space. If you say so. I've never heard of it. Sefton wrung his hands anxiously. Like most people here, he'd never been afoiled, and Paradine was very far from Dirkdeal. It was far from pretty much anything, including the sheltering arms of the Alliance, which was why it had fallen victim to a band of interstellar marauders with museum-piece hardware. Kadia turned her binoculars back on the plaza. A cluster of town officials had approached Shakai Din. Probably they were begging for more time to meet the marauders' demands. According to her intel, this crew would arrive unannounced at their target world, then spend about a week shaking down the locals for valuable resources. On Paradine, that meant the Nova crystals found in caves and tunnels throughout the planet. Paradine could never have been important. It was too remote for that. But its Nova crystals might have made it a little wealthier if not for the fact that those caves were only accessible in the jungle-smothered lowlands, dangerous places only rarely braved by Paradine's people, who lived in the safety of scattered upland towns like this. Still watching the plaza through her binoculars, Kadia asked, Have you seen the Soren before? Sefton nodded. He came down last time. It was a lot like this. They landed their shuttle in the middle of town and set down troops on the outskirts. They gave us 10 days to harvest as many Nova crystals as possible, unless. He didn't have to finish. Kadia had heard what these guys had done in the neighboring star system. A whole town of over 50,000, bombarded from orbit like the wrath of the vengeful empire of old. But these weren't Imperials. These were, so her sources said, pirates who stumbled on an old Enforcer-class picket ship that had been drifting dead in space for decades, apparently with its equipment intact. Nobody knew what had happened to the extirpator originally, but it was basically a half-scale of an old Imperial model Star Destroyer and plenty dangerous, especially on frontier worlds like this. Kadia had grown up on the far side of the galaxy, but hers had been a frontier world too. Small towns scattered across a mostly wild landscape. People who existed outside the sweep of history. A whole society the rest of the galaxy didn't notice or care about. It could be idyllic, it could be hardscrabble, and when intruders like this came, it could be very vulnerable. Though she'd only been on Paradine less than 2 weeks, her heart went out to these people. Sefton had edged closer to the window. Kadia offered him the binoculars again, but he shook them away. "I've seen this before," he explained. "They haven't hurt Dal Khan yet. We haven't given them reason to. Nobody picked a fight with the troops on the outskirts. We're not that foolish. We heard about what happened at Dal Metis. That's in the north. Some of their young people tried to overtake a squad of marauders at night." He lowered his head. "It was bad for everyone. You're making the right choice. Play along and do what they say." She hesitated for a heartbeat, then said, "This is the last time you'll have to deal with them. I promise." His eyes had cautious hope. "You think you can really stop them?" "Not alone, but my friends can." She pointed through the ceiling to the sky. "According to my sources, Shakai Din is the number 2 guy for Kreshik himself, which means he's probably in orbit right now." On his warship, Sefton shook his head. "No offense to your friends, but I wish we could call in an Alliance fleet to deal with him." "So do I, but my friends will be enough." Kadia really hoped so anyway. She held out the binoculars again. "Take these and keep watching. I'm going downstairs to make a call." Sefton nodded and took the binoculars this time. Kadia hurried out of the room, down the stairs to the basement where she kept her equipment. This building was Sefton's, and she was lucky he let her, and a forwarder, camp here. Lucky because he was old enough to remember certain stories and trust her once she revealed what she was. Lucky because his former owner, a local air transit business, had strung a direct cable to Dal Khan's long-range communications array. She plugged into that comm system over a week ago, in preparation for this exact moment. When she got to the basement, Kadia's face was flush. Even small exertions got her sweating on this hot, muggy world, so different from Kujika where she'd grown up. She pulled her light brown hair into a ponytail, but a few strands stuck to her face and tickled as she knelt on the stone floor beside her communicator. Hands slightly shaking, she typed up a single text-based message and sent it to Dal Khan's transmission antennae. She waited, heart pounding too, until she got a confirmation message sent. She exhaled. She'd done her part for now. Next, she'd have to wait for a reply and wait for her so-called friends to arrive. She'd never actually met any of them before, save one, but they were friends all the same, comrades and partners in their project to protect this forgotten corner of the galaxy because nobody else would. Kadia might have started out on far-flung Kujika, but she was now, to her own occasional astonishment, a Jedi Knight. She was, in fact, a newly knighted knight, on her 3rd solo mission, and the first one where strangers' lives hung in the balance. Hence the trembling hands and pounding heart. Once the message was sent, Kadia remained kneeling on the floor. She closed her eyes, took deep breaths, and repeated all the common techniques her master had taught her. Those did the trick, more or less. As she rose to rejoin Sefton upstairs, Kadia reminded herself that she wouldn't be alone for long. A dozen other Jedi had spread across a dozen other nearby worlds, each keeping lookout for the marauders. The first to confirm the presence of Kreshik's extirpator was to contact the others and summon everyone to his or her position. That duty had fallen to her. As she started up the stairs, she reflected that duty was also an honor. On her command, a dozen other knights were now racing for lonely Paradine to help save a world. She trusted them, and they trusted her, strangers, yet comrades in arms. Paradine. They were all going to Paradine, and Ben Skywalker would have felt better if he knew anything about the place. He tried to memorize every scrap of information about this mission. He'd reviewed records on each of the 13 planets Jedi scouts were stationed on. He'd also read about the missions of other Jedi, only half of whom were personally familiar to him. But somehow Paradine had slipped his mind, as had his Jedi, a woman. He knew her name, but he just couldn't remember it. Ben stood in the broad hangar of what passed for a trading outpost in the Dan Lobian sector, watching the last 2 matte black stealth fighters sail into land. The other 10 Jedi fighters had already docked at the station and were receiving pre-operation status checks from their owners. Ben scanned the group, matching faces to names. There was Bandy Geffer, a black-haired and lanky man a few years younger than Ben. The beaked and black-eyed Komasi was Rive, a newly minted knight who'd grown up in the nearby Verigi sector. The Sakrubian carefully circling her stealths with the mechanics I was. Damn it all, he couldn't remember, even though they'd spoken shortly before. It all came down to stress. In his almost 30 years, Ben Skywalker had battled Sith lords and timeless abominations. He'd led commando raids, explored esoteric force techniques, and investigated the furthest corners of the galaxy. But this was his first time leading a Jedi mission that was solely his. Not his father's, not the Council's. From conception to completion, this was Ben's operation. Success or failure rested solely with him. He couldn't decide how that made him feel exactly, but queasy and suffocating were relevant descriptors. The last two stealth X's sat down and their pilots clambered out of their cockpits. The gold scale cha must have been Haskell Nim. The human male was Teeman Drake, a Corellian. Ben had never met either of them, but as he stepped toward their fighters, they clearly recognized him. Both Jedi faced him, straightened, and dipped their heads in the start of twin bows. No need for that. Ben waved a hand. He hated it when civilians treated him like a master, let alone fellow knights. I'm glad you made it. How are your ships? I only need to refuel, Scoundem said, long forked tongue snaking out between fangs. Me too. Drake looked around the hangar. Is this everyone? You two are the last. I'm going to bring in some droids to get your ships fueled up, then call a briefing. Gather everybody around over there. Ben pointed to an open patch in the hangar next to his own stealths. Both Jedi nodded. Drake almost bowed, then went to gather the others. Ben watched them go. Drake looked no more than 5 years younger than him. With the Scoundem, it was harder to guess, but he remembered reading about the Cha's solo missions in the Atravis sector. He was probably one of the more experienced Jedi in the group. Or maybe it was she. Ben had a hard time telling with reptilians. He pushed it all out of his mind and went over to the service station, where a quintet of ancient, rust-pocked dumb series droids received his orders and started dragging fuel tubes over to the new arrivals. By the time Ben got back to his own stealths, the other Jedi had gathered and their eyes were all on him. He hoped, probably in vain, they couldn't sense how frazzled he was. Ben took a deep breath, let it out, then said, "Thank you all for getting here as fast as you could. Once we leave the station, it's just 2.5 hours to Paradine. I want to run through everything now, face to face, so there's no confusion." Ignoring direct contact with their probing eyes, Ben took a holo projector disc from the pocket of his flight suit, dropped into a squat, and put it on the deck in front of the Jedi. He tapped it on and a shimmering image sprung up before them. It depicted a wedge-shaped warship, like a classic Imperial Star Destroyer but smaller and sleeker, with a flat, elongated bridge rising over the aft section. You all know what our target is. Since Kreshik found Extirpator, he and his pirates have been running amok in this part of the rim. The Alliance has no jurisdiction this far out, which means we have to help these people ourselves. Ben stood straight. You also know the plan. We're going to use our stealth X's to get right up close to the Extirpator and knock out key systems using shadow bombs, hopefully before they even know we're there. Unfortunately, we don't have up-to-date specs on Extirpator. According to my source with Alliance intelligence, it went missing over 40 years ago. The Imperials chalked it up to a freak accident, pirates, or a ship-bound plague. My source tells me that Kreshik only has about 300 pirates in his crew. The standard Imperial complement for the ship is over 1,000. We can't assume it will be undermanned, and I doubt he has the ability to make major modifications. So, we're going to lay down our attack based on the standard specs for an Enforcer-class picket ship. Ben spent the next few minutes pointing out key locations on the holographic model and delegating targets to specific Jedi. This time he met everyone's eyes while doing so. Most simply nodded. Drake gave an enthusiastic yes, sir, when told he was to target the ventral sensor package, and Bandy asked a few questions about his assignment, the navigation array topside the bridge. The only time Ben faltered was when he had to address the Sakubian woman, whose name he still didn't remember. He saved her for the end, hoping he could wiggle his way out of embarrassment. When there were just 2 Jedi left, he got a helping hand from the other remainder. The short, brown-furred Bim standing beside the Sekrubian said, "You all know what my role will be, moral support and coordination. What will Manisha's target be?" Manisha, that was it. Ben looked at the Sekrubian's expectant, violet face and said, "You're going to be stationed topside. While Bandy knocks out the Navarre, you're going to drop a shadow bomb on their comm antennae. I don't think Kreshik has any allies nearby he can call for help, but we don't want to risk it." Manisha nodded seriously. "You can count on me." Ben nodded back. "We don't have the firepower to destroy Extirpator completely, but we can render it dead in space if we take them by surprise and drop our shadow bombs in perfect sync. Which means we're all going to have to rely on Jedi Jallu. Listen for her signal. Wait for it. When it comes, everyone has to detonate bombs at the same time." He looked back to the little Bim. This was Ben's operation, but his father had insisted he bring Revleen Jallu as his second in command. She was the most experienced knight on the mission, and was expected to rank up to master any day now. If this hadn't been Ben's plan, she'd have surely been the one leading it. Jallu folded small hands in front of her. The rest of the Jedi wore lightsabers from the belts of their flight suits, but not her. She was known throughout the Order for not carrying one, and not using physical weapons of any kind. That was okay if everything went according to plan, because she could devote herself to synchronizing the others in the Force, but if things got messy, maybe she made exceptions for self-defense. Ben hoped it wouldn't come to that. Bandy raised a hand and asked, "What about our Jedi on Paradine? Will they be joining us?" "Her job is to provide a distraction," Ben said, and cursed himself again for forgetting the woman's name. "The plan is for her to set off some fire show on the planet and draw as many of Extirpator's TIE fighters away as possible. So you'll be in contact with her when we hit orbit. My comm system is already patched into her frequency," Jallu nodded. "I'll let her know when we arrive. Our decant point is 500 kilometers over Paradine's North Pole," Ben said. "From there we'll kill sublights, obtain Extirpator's location, then begin taking position. The less thrust we use, the less likely we'll be spotted, so we'll all be going slowly." "That's fine. Patience and coordination are more important than speed." Rive lifted a wing and asked, "If the TIE fighters are deployed outside Extirpator, won't they come for us once their command ship is down?" "That's a very real possibility," Ben nodded. "Enforcer-class ships were built to carry 2 squadrons of TIEs, which means the odds could be 2-1 against us. But even if Kreshik's gotten all 24 working, they'll still be 40 years out of date, unshielded, and with only standard laser cannons as weapons." "And we're the ones with the Force," said Bandy with a grin. "I'd say the advantage is still ours." "It will be," Ben agreed, "but we can't afford to get cocky. This is a high-risk mission, no doubt about it, but somebody has to help the people out here. The Alliance won't do it, and these aren't the kind of planets where they can afford to buy mercenaries, so it's up to us." This was the part where he was supposed to give an inspirational speech. The assembled Jedi, bless them, seemed inspired already, but they deserved a few brave words to send them off. Ben recalled the ones he'd prepared and said, "This is what Jedi are meant to do. Not sit and meditate all day. Not meddle in the halls of power. We're going to be helping people who don't have anyone to help them. So let's get to work." Short and sweet, it seemed to do the trick. His father could have come up with something a little more poetic, but Ben was satisfied. He almost felt confident as the Jedi scattered for their stealth X's. He watched as Drake and Scal Nim shooed away the dumb droids and gave their fighters final checks. Bandy bounded up the ladder into his cockpit and Manisha gave her ship another look over. Confidence faltered when Ben wondered which of these Jedi might be dead in 3 hours. "They are all brave in the face of danger," Jallu said, a soft but jarring voice at Ben's right hip. He trembled, then composed himself. "It's in the job description, isn't it?" "Quite." Jallu's long left ear twitched. "Still, 12 fighters against a Star Destroyer requires a special kind of bravery, even if it is a small destroyer." Ben frowned. He'd had to argue with the Jedi Council, including his father, that the Jedi should take on this mission. Many of them, including his father, thought it too risky, the problem too remote. But, he'd pleaded, That was exactly why the Jedi should take on his challenge. They save lives and show the greater galaxy that Jedi still help the helpless. So eventually he'd won them over, even as they reminded him that it might cost the lives of Jedi under his command. He hadn't expected Jallu to resurrect the argument here and now, right before the mission. She didn't. The Ben merely clacked her tongue and said, "You don't want for ambition, Ben, but I suppose you never have." You'd be surprised. When I was little, I didn't want to have anything to do with the Force at all. I didn't even think I wanted to be a Jedi. Interesting. What changed? Lots of conflict, lots of pain, lots of loss, lots of learning. Way too much to get into here. He told her, "Let's say I found my place in the scheme of things. And the place is here, on the edge, facing danger. That's the job description, especially for Skywalker. And that, he'd accepted eventually, was what he was." Jallu seemed satisfied and turned to go. "Wait," Ben said. When she glanced back, he lowered his voice. "Thanks for the help back there, with Manisha." "Help? What help?" Jallu replied, a twinkle in her large eyes. Ben grinned. "Exactly. And the Jedi at Paradine is Kadia Toran. I believe this is one of her first missions since being knighted." That rang a bell, however faint. "Kadia Toran. I'll remember her." "I should hope so. I can't bail you out all the time," Jallu replied, then hopped spryly toward her X-Wing. Kreshik was a lucky man, and he knew it. If he was the type to believe in gods, he'd be rejoicing in their favor. The best luck happened when you didn't expect it. He'd been hiding from Alliance patrols near a small, lifeless planet in the Abeloth sector when he'd found an Imperial warship drifting dead in space. It had taken a while to get the thing up and running again, not to mention clean out the desiccated corpses of its apparently plague-stricken crew, and Kadia had urged him to scuttle it for pieces, but no. The moment Kreshik laid eyes on this giant gray dagger, a bona fide M-Star destroyer, he knew he had to make it his. When he'd returned this ship to operation, he'd considered changing the name, but really, he couldn't turn down Extirpator. The name was so old-school Imperial, viciously, shamelessly menacing, that he just had to go with it. His last ship had been a flying bucket of a Star Galleon class, stolen from another batch of pirates in the Chopani sector. This ship, in contrast, had a broad bridge with an elevated aisle running between the crew pits. Standing in its center, looking out the viewport past the off-white dagger's tip toward helpless Paradine, Kreshik had never felt so, well, imperious. As he watched, a Y-4 transport appeared from Extirpator's underside and fell toward the planet. A TIE fighter joined it on either flank. Unnecessarily, a crewman at the sensor station reported, "TIEs are away, transports away." Like a good third of Kreshik's mangy crew, and Kreshik himself, Sladak was a Siniasan, green-skinned, gaunt and glowering, tall and imposing like his captain. Well, not quite as imposing as his captain. Kreshik threw a glance at the comm station. "Call Dogfight and tell them to be ready to receive it, or else." As the transport dwindled to a speck against Paradine's green-white sphere, Sladak reported, "They say they're waiting with the Nova crystals." Nice of them to be on time. Kreshik crossed burly arms over his chest. Kadia had made personal touchdowns at 8 different settlements scattered across the planet, demanding a harvest of Nova crystals and setting a timeline. The first 2 towns had made their deliveries without a problem. Dogfight was number 3 on the list. There was always the chance these villagers would try something funny. That was why 2 TIEs and Kadia himself had gone down with the transport. They found Extirpator with a hangar only half filled. He supposed a chunk of his crew must have tried abandoning ship before it died. The ships still aboard were thankfully well preserved, which meant he had a half-dozen Y-4 transports, 3 Lambda shuttles, and 14 TIE fighters to work with. Not that he expected much of a fight from Paradine. The last time here some locals had tried to start trouble, he'd had half their town killed. The settlements here were scattered across the planet like islands in a sea of dangerous jungle, incapable or unwilling to pool their meager resources for collective defense. Picking off one had been enough to cow the rest. Kreshik was a lucky man but not particularly patient. He began striding up and down the deck, waiting for word from Paradine. After an interminable 10 minutes, Sladak reported that the transport had landed and was beginning to load the shipment of Nova crystals. 3 down, 5 to go. Not bad, Kreshik thought, and grinned a sharp-toothed grin. These Nova crystals fetched a hefty price, and if this planet's foolish natives wanted to, they could have made themselves some decent money. But no, they sat in their isolated towns on this isolated backwater and did nothing of note. Really, some people deserve to be bullied. Boss, we have a new hail, Sladak said. It's coming from one of the settlements, Dalkan. That was number 5 on the list, he recalled. They've got 2 days to hit their quota. What are they complaining about? They're not complaining. Sladak's green brow bunched. They say they're sending the shipment early. What do you mean they're sending it? On one of their ships. That's what they said. Kreshik stalked over to the sensor station and laid a claw-tipped hand on the crewman's shoulder. Is anything else in space right now? Yorkin, a giant wrinkly-faced Hulk with surprisingly nimble fingers, worked his console. I'm picking up something, boss. It's lifting off the planet, pushing through Atmo. We should have is making a second. This was a surprise. Kreshik didn't like surprises, especially from normally supine scum like the Paradians. He said, get 2 TIE fighters out there. No, 4. It would take them at least 5 minutes to launch, more likely 10. Kreshik had Imperial grade, albeit aged, hardware, but his crew weren't exactly wind-up imp soldiers. As they waited for the TIEs to launch, Yorkin reported, it's a mid-sized freighter, looks like a Sorrel Suubnella type. He snorted. That bucket's even older than this ship. Hail the freighter directly, Kreshik told Sladak. Tell them to hold position and wait for TIE escorts. In a low voice, Yorkin growled, are you really going to let that thing land? Might be full of bombs or something. Kreshik had the same idea, but there was a chance the thing really was carrying Nova crystals that Dalkan had, for whatever reason, decided to deliver early. He was loath to blow up a ship full of valuables unless he had no other choice. He was ruminating when the choice made itself. Yorkin said, that transport just changed direction. It's cutting away from us. Is it trying to run to light speed? No. The Hulk's face get even more wrinkly. It's doubling back toward the planet and cutting deep across its gravwell. That made no sense. Kreshik growled, have the TIEs pursue. Shoot to cripple. They're not responding to hails, Sladak said, unnecessarily. Kreshik considered, then said, have the TIEs at Dogfight join pursuit. Whatever that ship's doing, I want it caught. And if we can't capture it, kill it? Kadia sat strapped into the old Sorrel Suub's pilot seat, teeth rattling in her skull with every lurch and bounce. And the TIEs hadn't even gotten in firing range yet. If this old freighter broke apart before she could lead the fighters away from Extirpator, if she died because she picked the wrong ship from the scrapyard of Dalkan's hangar, well, at least she wouldn't have the live with the embarrassment of botching her 3rd solo mission as an ordained Jedi Knight. This was the best option she'd come up with, and she'd considered many. According to the plan, her job was to make a distraction and draw as many TIEs as possible away from Extirpator so the other Jedi could cripple it. She'd entertained other distractions, like starting a riot in Dalkan or lighting a fire in the jungles. She'd even pondered going to Dogfight to kidnap Paradine, but decided that was beyond her skills. More importantly, every other option she could think of put innocent lives on Paradine at risk. And that was something she simply would not do. Taking danger off others and laying it on your own back was the Jedi thing to do. Kadia hoped so anyway. She also hoped this ancient bucket didn't break apart on her. The ship kept shaking as she cut low above Paradine's curve. From that altitude you could forget about the raiding pirates and the dangerous jungles and admire it for what it was, a planet glowing with light and life against the infinite dead cold of space, like a little jewel. Then the first emerald laser blast hit her shields, rattling her teeth even more. Kadia gripped the control yoke with sweaty hands and began weaving erratically, as much as the ship was capable anyway. The other TIEs were closing in, she'd drawn 6 in all. Frantically she reached out with the Force, toward the oh-so-faint presence of the other Jedi in the system, and told them to do what they'd come here for. What in the hells was she doing? That was Ben's thought, and he was pretty sure he felt it roiling through all the other Jedi as well. Revealing Jallu, sitting in her customized stealths at the edge of Paradine's orbit, tried to calm the others, but it wasn't working. The plan had been to draw as many ties to the planet's surface before the Jedi moved in with their stealth fighters. Because all 13 Jedi had been stationed on different planets, no further details had been made. It was assumed that each Jedi would be able to devise a strategy to fit the local situation. Instead, the one at Paradine, Kadia something or other, had decided to grab a 50-year-old junker and run for it. It was a good thing Ben had learned to control his anger, because the thought of his very first command mission being scuppered by some foul-up rookie was infuriating. As he sat in his StealthX's unlit cockpit, watching his sensor board and the gray stretch of extirpator 50 kilometers of his port flank, Ben felt a presence touch them in the Force. It touched everyone in the group and frantically urged them to act. The foul-up rookie, in other words, begging for a bailout. Ben had to control his anger again. He didn't know if those pursuing ties were shooting to kill, but if they were, Kadia was in deep trouble. He also knew they couldn't throw away the entire mission because of her. He also knew that, as mission leader, it was his job to get every Jedi through safely, even the foul-up rookies. Maybe especially them. He took a deep breath and focused his attention on Jallu. He passed on instructions and trusted her to relay them to the other Jedi, then gave thrusters a gentle tap and pushed his stealths into motion. He would try to bail out Kadia. The other Jedi would proceed according to plan. Ben's self-assigned role had been to destroy the cruiser's ventral power generator, but Rive had also been given that target. The Kilmasi would just have to double up on his shadow bombs. Ben had to trust the others to do their jobs better than the foul-up rookie. He gave engines a stronger boost and chased after her as fast as stealth would allow. "Boss, something's weird." Kreshik spun on Yorkin and said sarcastically, "Really? I hadn't noticed." "Not the freighter. I thought I picked up something else too, a lot closer to us." Kreshik frowned. "How?" "Nothing else left the planet and nothing came out of hyperspace." "I know. Maybe it was a glitch. This old computer's got to have bugs." Or, Kreshik thought, there might really be something out there. Before he'd become a lucky man, he'd been an unlucky one, and as an unlucky man, he'd learned to expect threats around every corner. "Warm weapons," he said. "Raised shields." Yorkin, and a lot of other crew, stared at him. He glared back. "You heard me? Just 'cause we're flying this big beauty doesn't mean we can be careless. Shields up." "It'll take a minute," one of his techs said. "Shield generators are slow, buggy." "I get it." Kreshik growled and asked Yorkin, "Anything new on sensors?" "They just got another blip," the Hawk scowled. "I think something's trailing the ties, but I can't figure what. It can't be very big. Maybe." If he got the rest out, Kreshik didn't hear it. The deck shook, alarms wailed. All hells broke loose. The thing about luck is that it never lasts forever. 100 kilometers away, so far that Extirpator's giant wedge was just a tiny fleck, Revlim Jallu watched, felt, and touched. As she sat in the cockpit of her stealths, specially modified to fit her small frame, she touched the other Jedi across the distance, and they touched her back. They told her, one by one, when they reached their positions at different points across Extirpator's hull. She felt, through a wider distance, Ben Skywalker's frustration as he chased after Kadia Torn's freighter. Ben was angry at the other human, angry at himself. He wasn't thinking clearly, and neither was Kadia, who was on verge of panic. Jallu couldn't do anything for those two. She could only do what she'd come here to do. All the other Jedi were in place. There was no time to waste. She touched them all one final time. Then she watched. Bim had keen eyes, and she could see, even through the distance, the pinpoint explosions of warheads thrown not by propellant but the Force. They seemed to flash all across Extirpator's surface. She checked her sensors for a more detailed view. They reported explosions on the underside, the power generator, the targeting sensors, and along the dorsal spine, weapons, navigation, and at the command tower 2, comms, shields. Sensors marked 21 detonations, 2 from each Jedi, plus an extra, probably from Rive at the main generator. But was that enough? Ben's strategy had been to render Extirpator dead in space with a single, synchronized strike. If it failed, if Kreshik's warship was still operable, the Jedi might have no choice but to retreat. She reached out and touched the others one by one, Bandy Jeffer, that young Corellian Team and Drake, Manisha, Scout Nim, Rive. She felt a flare of heat, fear, and pain, followed by dread echoing from a howling absence. Rive was gone. Her sharp eyes confirmed what sensors showed. Fat green turbolaser bolts were spewing from Extirpator. The ship didn't seem to be moving, and sensors picked up expanding debris clouds, but some guns were still operable. Partial success might be as bad as total failure. Jallu was a pacifist like a few Jedi were. She carried no weapon and, though the stealth was armed with laser cannons and a few shadow bombs, she had no intention of using them even now. But she would not abandon fellow Jedi either. Her small hands worked the controls, warming engines and activating shields. Then she took the X-Wing's control stick and charged in to help. Ben didn't know if this mission was salvageable or if it had been wrecked beyond repair. He did know that one Jedi was already dead, Rive, who'd been with the Order since he was a hatchling and had never wanted any other life. Ben had watched his father officially knight the young Kilmossi little over a year ago. He also knew that another young Jedi was going to die if he didn't help her. Maybe this mess was her fault. Maybe it was his. They'd only get a chance to hash it out if he saved her sorry butt. There was no point being stealthy now. He gunned engines to full and flared after the beleaguered Sorosu up and the 6 pursuing TIEs. The freighter had dipped low, skirting the upper layers of the planet's atmosphere without diving in. Aerial friction periodically flared across its intact shields, as did plasma scatter from the TIE's skirting shots. It was amazing the freighter had lasted this long, but it wouldn't endure for much longer. Before this mission, Ben had said that a Jedi still had the advantage in the 2-on-1 fight versus the ragged old TIEs. 6-on-1, though, was a whole different matter. There was nothing for it, though. As soon as he got in range, he expanded his fighters as foils, activated his targeting computer, and locked onto the nearest TIE. His fighter was designed to carry 8 proton torpedoes, 4 in each tube beneath the cockpit, but his starboard supply had been replaced with propulsion-less shadow bombs. That left him with 4 tracking torpedoes for 6 fighters. Obviously, he'd have to make the most of his limited supplies. A tap of his control stick sent the first proton torpedo lancing out. As the targeted TIE finally noticed him and tried to evade, Ben shifted to a second enemy, got a quick lock, and fired off another torp. The TIEs were old and sluggish in the hands of pilots not used to them. Both exploded into fiery blossoms over Paradine's emerald curve. 4-on-1 now. A little better, but still bad odds now that he'd lost the element of surprise. One TIE continued to chase the freighter, but the other 3 peeled around toward their attacker. Ben turned his comm onto the broadest freak, hoping the pilot of the freighter would hear him. "Get down into the atmosphere," he called. "They're less maneuverable there." If she responded, Ben didn't hear it. His attention was all on the TIEs. He bobbed and weaved and tried to keep himself above them, with space as a backdrop. His black X-Wing was harder to spot while their silhouettes were clear against the planet's green and white swirls. Ben was a good pilot, but not a great one. Certainly he wasn't a natural like his cousin Jaina. He danced and weaved around spears of green plasma, sometimes suffering shots to his shields while he returned red bolts of his own. He kept his targeting computer online, and as soon as he got a lock, he fired off a 3rd torpedo. This one chased after a veering TIE, followed it outside of Ben's range of vision, and rewarded him with a distant flash. A quick check of his scanner showed another enemy down. 1 torp was all it took. Bless the old-school Empire's disregard for sentient life. The other 2 TIEs were still coming at him. Ben took another volley of laser blasts, but his shields held. His attackers split formation, one staying beneath, one slanting to higher altitudes, so Ben was pinned between them. A bad place to be. Looking down, he could see the square silhouette of the beleaguered freighter sinking deeper, toward Paradine, still hounded by the last tie. He needed to take his own advice and draw his enemies into the atmosphere. Ben tipped his fighter so the planet's bright swirls filled his viewport, then gun engines. Thrust in Paradine's gravity dragged him down fast. The tie had to veer wildly for avoid collision. Ben altered course for the freighter, checked his targeting computer again, and waited for a lock on the last TIE fighter. When he got close enough to see the smoke pouring from the freighter, he got what he needed. Ben released his last torpedo just before laser fire fell like rain on his aft shields. He barely noticed the burst of warhead killing target. His displays flashed with alarms, and the cockpit shuddered around him as the ties began to break through his defenses. Muttering curses, Ben dove again. His X-wing plunged through a mountain of white high-altitude clouds, blinding him and the enemy both. He veered and twisted inside the cloud, but when he burst free they were still after him, still firing. A shot cut through shields and clipped his top starboard as foil. Another scorched his underside. No more than 2 miles below, the green-draped mountains of Paradine's endless jungles ran on and on. If he had to land, crash, or eject into them, he might never come out. Ben tried to shake his opponents, but his battered X-wing was sluggish. The friction of atmosphere wasn't slowing the ties enough. He was out of torps but still had 4 shadow bombs, though he couldn't think of how to use them here, in an aerial dogfight. If he could drop them behind him somehow, get the ties to fly into them. Another hit. His lower port engine exploded. Noxious smoke filled his cockpit and Ben knew he was going to die here, trying and failing to save a foul-up rookie on his first command mission. After all he'd already done. After all he'd already been through. Something darted overhead, briefly shadowing his cockpit. Then there was a flash behind him. He checked his static Mars sensors and saw that the freighter had dropped down through the sky, right on top of the ties. It must have torn the solar panel off one of them because Ben saw half of one fighter spinning down into the jungle. But the final tie was still flying. Leaving the smoking freighter behind, it cut straight toward Ben, laser cannons blazing desperately. They peppered the nose of his ship, tearing the hull, then skimmed the cockpit, scorching the transparent steel bubble without quite shattering it. Ben turned toward the fighter, faced it head-on, and pumped his remaining 3 cannons for all they were worth. The first bolt slipped harmlessly around the tie's solar panels and cockpit, but the next ones hit the bullseye. The fighter exploded. Ben was too close to do anything but fly through the expanding fireball. That was enough to doom him. Shrapnel ripped the skin of his X-wing. Another engine exploded. Power failed. He plunged downward, trailing smoke, the jungle rushing toward him. Land, crash, eject. Only one option gave him any chance of living. Ben reached for the ejection lever under his seat and yanked it. He continued to fall. He swore, yanked it again, wondered if the hit to his cockpit bubble had messed up the ejection process. Then the transparent steel burst upward. Ben followed a second later, propelled by the miniature rockets beneath his seat. For a second he was soaring free among the clouds. Then gravity took over, and he followed his dying fighter in a downward plunge. Kadia watched her rescuer fall. She watched the X-wing trail black smoke as it streaked toward the jungle-coated hills and vanish in a fatal fireball. And she watched the dark fleck of an ejection seat fall as well. She couldn't tell if repulsors were slowing his descent, but she prayed they were. That Jedi have saved her life and needed to return to favor. Her freighter had been battered badly. She was still amazed it hadn't broken apart, especially after she'd brazenly dropped down on top of one of the ties. Alarms kept wailing in the cockpit, but at least the engines worked, mostly, and the hull was intact. She had no idea what was happening in space, but as she dropped altitude and tried to follow the ejection seat, she slammed the comm console until it buzzed to life. She'd last had this thing programmed to the Jedi Sharecom freak, so she called, "Can anyone hear me? This is Kadia Toran." After a burst of static she heard a faint soft voice. "We hear you, Kadia. Are you flying?" That sounded like Rivaline Jallu. As Kadia knew, the Ben was the only knight on this mission she'd met before. "Barely. The one who came after me went down, but they ejected. I'm going to try and pick them up." "Please do," Jallu said. Jedi Skywalker is vital to this mission. Skywalker. Ben Skywalker had got shot down trying to rescue her. Because she didn't trust herself not to curse aloud, Kadia turned off the comm. She took a deep breath, gripped the control yoke with both hands, and descended further. She lost sight of the ejection seat and a quick sensor scan picked up no beacon. She could try searching in the Force for him, Ben Skywalker, of all the Karking Jedi. Just her Karking luck, but she had no idea what to search for, and the jungles of Paradine made the Force treacherous and confusing. She pulled the ship into a tighter turn and powered up repulsors in preparation for some treetop flying. As soon as she hit the switch, she heard a whining noise that got loud fast, followed by a sharp pop. Then there was smoke, then trembling, then howling wind as the ship began to break apart around her. Kadia shouted aloud, "Oh, now you give out." Naturally, there was no response. Cursing freely, she grabbed the control yoke and tried to pull up, or at least soften her fall toward the jungle. She slammed buttons for repulsors, but they were dead. She fired retro burners instead, and her stomach lurched as the freighter slowed its shuddering fall. But fall it did. The treetops were upon her, then the slapping branches, then tree trunks cracking against her viewport, then an explosion of roots and bush and black dirt as the freighter slammed nose first into the ground. The straps across Kadia's torso cut painfully into her chest and shoulders, but they kept her from dashing her skull upon the viewport. She took deep breaths before unlatching them. Interior light struggled to stay on. The air smelled of smoke, but also the familiar thick odors of the jungle. Ben Skywalker was out there, hopefully alive. Kadia had to find him. Then some other Jedi would have to find them, because this ship wasn't getting in the air again. Groaning, she got out of the seat and walked best she could across the slanted deck. The big cargo hold was mostly empty. There'd never been Nova crystals aboard, but there were a few crates of supplies. The jungles of Paradine were especially treacherous, and the locals always had emergency equipment on hand in case they needed to brave the planet's dangerous depths. Her friend Sefton and his sons had shown Kadia through the jungle twice. She knew the basics of survival. The basics would have to do, for her sake, and for Ben Skywalker's. Once she had everything she needed, Kadia opened the starboard airlock, dropped 3 meters from hull to dirt, and went out into the forest, not yet knowing where to go. With Ben Skywalker missing in action, command of this mission fell to Jallu. She found herself facing decision time in a battle neither won nor lost but stuck in a precarious middle ground. The surviving 10 stealth fighters had formed up together. Extirpator sat in space with engines and sections of hull dark, but some of his turbolasers were still operational and had already vaporized 1 Jedi. Based on sensor scans and long-range visual inspection, it seemed that the ventral power generator had been damaged but not destroyed. The topside shields, including those around the bridge, looked down, but the guns might still be active. The destroyer hadn't launched any additional TIE fighters beyond the 6 already destroyed. 10 stealth X's might be able to make a run on the bridge and destroy it, but it might cost more Jedi. In their earlier discussions, Ben had said he wanted Kreshik captured if at all possible and delivered to the Alliance so he could be punished for his crimes, and so the Jedi could be seen bringing justice. Destroying the bridge wouldn't do that. Right now, Extirpator seemed to be holding orbit, slowly but steadily circling the planet, but if it was nudged the wrong way and fell to the surface, there was no telling what damage it might cause the inhabited world. Jallu was not a Ben prone to profanity, but she felt like cursing. Even if Ben hadn't been shot down, they'd still be facing the same dilemma. She'd mentioned her concerns to him in private, but Ben had brushed them aside. He'd been determined to do something heroic, and to be seen doing it. The other Jedi were growing impatient. On a private line, Bandy Geffer hailed her and asked, "Are we going to sit here and wait for her to recover Skywalker? My fighter's taken some damage, and so has Manisha's. I don't know if we're good for another round of combat." "We will not leave this system until we know Ben's status," Jallu said. She knew it wasn't an answer. Cautiously, Bandy said, "We could send a few sorties toward Extirpator. See how many guns they've got operational, how vulnerable they are. I was thinking, Someone should at least knock the hangar out of commission, so they don't get more ties out. A good idea, Jallu exhaled. Give me one moment. I think. She paused. A light was flashing on her console. What is it? Asked Bandy. I'm being hailed. By an unknown source. Extirpator. Jallu doubted it. Let me check. She closed the link with Bandy and opened a new channel. Identify yourself. Hello? Is this one of the Jedi? The voice sounded male, old, with an accent she didn't recognize. Are you calling from the planet? That's right. My name is Sefton. I've been sheltering a young lady for the past few weeks. I think she's a friend of yours. How did you get this frequency? She left it with me, in case of emergency. I'm calling from Khan. It's a settlement 200 kilometers south of the equator. What's happened up there? Jallu wished she knew. The warship has been damaged but not disabled. We're considering options. How many of you are up there? She was uncertain who else might hear this call. Well, she said, 10. 10? He sounded let down. Well, if you need help, a place to set down and patch up, we can have you here at Khan. We don't want to put your town in danger. We slipped into Nightside about an hour ago. If you move fast, you can get down while that cruiser's on the other side of the planet. All right, I'll consider it, and thank you for the offer. After a second, Sefton said, Where's Kadia? I can't get a hold of her. It sounded like honest concern in his voice. She's retrieving a pilot who went down. We hope to be back in contact with her soon, Jallu said, and left out the details. All right. Well, whatever you learn, or decide, you can reach me now. Let me know. I will. And thank you again. Jallu killed the signal. She could feel the other Jedi in their X-Wings all expectantly reaching for her. She opened their shared channel. I just received a call from groundside. A helpful local is offering assistance. Bandy, Manisha, head down to the settlement called Khan. It's about an hour into night and 200 kilometers south of the equator. Report back once you've landed successfully. She hoped that would be enough to guide them. Jallu watched the two X-Wings peel away and fall toward the planet, then said, Everyone else, we hold in orbit for now. Drake, scowl them, prepare a sortie toward Extirpator. Not close enough to be dangerous, just enough to test their mettle. The other Jedi gave their affirmatives. With Ben missing, they'd trust her and follow her. If only she had anywhere to lead them. Chapter 2. Things became clearer one report at a time. Extirpator's main power generator had been hit, forcing an emergency shutdown, but Kreshik's engineers thought they could get it running again at half strength. Once the juice got flowing, they could get the hangar operational. Most turbo lasers were still online, but the dorsal targeting computer had been destroyed, which meant all topside guns would have to be aimed manually. Engines were trickier. They'd taken hits, but until main power returned, it was impossible to run full diagnostics. Long-range comms were gone, as were most shield generators and sensors. Extirpator was vulnerable, there was no doubt about that. But as yet their enemies had only sent a few tentative sorties and fled at the first flash of laser fire. Kreshik wasn't sure why, but their hesitation was working in his favor. Maybe, just maybe, he was still a lucky man. He hovered over Sladak's shoulder as the comms officer tried to contact the planet's surface with the secondary short-range transmitter. Soon Kaiden's reptilian face appeared as a flickering, quarter-sized hollow image. The sword immediately said, We heard about the attack. What the devil happened up there? We're still working on it, Kreshik said. Main power is down, but we're getting it back online. We're not sure about engines yet. Are you still under attack? No. We don't know who or how many, but we destroyed 2 of them, plus that runaway freighter. I want you to fly to Khan. Boss. Yorkin bellowed from the sensor station. You'll want to see this. Decorum had never been big in Kreshik's crew. Still, he scowled at the interruption. Hold the line, he told Kaiden, then went over to the Hulk. This has better be good. It is. Yorkin pointed to a flat screen on his console. This is visual feed from a portside cam, magnified 800%. Take a look. Kreshik looked. It was the wreckage of a starship drifting against Paradine's dayside phase, presumably the one their turbo-lacers had destroyed during the chaotic first minute of the fight. The ship had a dark hull, half of which had been blown to mangled wreckage, but he made out a long, narrow fuselage and 2 wings splitting off from one side. It was the shape of a classic X-wing. The Alliance wouldn't come after us. Not this far out, Kreshik sneered. It was why he'd chosen these targets in the first place. And if they did, they'd bring more than just snub fighters. I was with the Peace Brigade back during the Vong War, Yorkin said in a low voice. Nobody liked to admit that nowadays. We ran into some Jedi once, and they had this trick where they'd throw bombs at you with their minds. Kreshik snorted. Sounds like propaganda. I'm serious. I think they stripped the propulsion systems from torpedoes, so they're hard to track, then use their weird powers to move them. Stealth bombs, basically. He tapped the screen. I heard the Jedi built some fancy stealth fighters too. Kreshik squinted at the image. So you're saying, we have Jedi after us? Think it's likely, boss, Yorkin said, expression bleak. But Kreshik grinned. He'd never dealt with them personally, but he'd heard stories, most so overblown as to be unbelievable. But if the tales were even halfway true, he knew he could turn this to his advantage. Leaving Yorkin to scowl at his monitor, Kreshik hurried back to the comm station, where Shak Kai-Den's shrunken holoimage was still waiting. I've got 2 jobs for you, he told the sword. First, pay Dao Khan a visit. The transport flew out of there and whatever the Jedi were up to. Jedi? Bleated Shak Kai-Den. That transport was part of it. I don't care who you have to torture, find out who was on it. Then try to find where that ship went down in the jungle. There was an X-wing that crashed too. If they're survivors, I want them, but be careful, cause you could be facing. Jedi, Shak Kai-Den repeated. Are you serious? Dead, Kreshik snarled. Our hangar's still down, but as soon as it's working, I'll launch more ships to help the search. And I'll have Slaydak send down our sensor records. Should tell you where on the planet to start looking. All right, anything else? Not for you. Get to work. Kreshik reached across Slaydak's console and slapped a button, killing the transmission. Then he wheeled away from the comm station, stalked into the center of that Imperious bridge, and bellowed, Congratulations, gents, we've got Jedi mad at us. But we already took a couple of them out and I know how to get the rest. We've still got bottom guns working, right? Right, boss, says someone in the crew pit. Then watch the planet. Engines are down, so we're still drifting. Once the town gets in firing range, I don't care which one, you're gonna lock on and await my signal. Got it. Agreement ricocheted around the chamber. They sounded confident now, despite all the hurt they'd taken. They got it from their captain, and Kreshik's wasn't feigned. The fact that Jedi were after them made him swell with pride and optimism. Luck may or may not be with him still, but before being lucky he'd been mean, and meanness never failed. Ben Skywalker was trying very hard to be optimistic. Yes, his X-wing had been shot down. Yes, he was stranded in the middle of hundreds, possibly thousands of square kilometers of jungle. Yes, his ejection seat had lodged him in the crotch of a giant tree 30 meters from the ground and could fall at any moment. But at least he hadn't broken anything. Getting out of the chair was the first step. Very carefully, Ben unstrapped himself, then stretched his right arm to grab hold of the nearest thick branch. Then he pivoted, held on very tight with both hands and pulled himself up. One foot got caught in the chair's empty crash webbing. He flailed his leg until he freed it, but the effort unbalanced the chair and tipped it from his perch. It fell and fell, crashing through lower-level branches, until it hit the ground with a damp-sounding thud. Ben clung to the higher branch, gloved hands clutching rough bark, legs flailing beneath him. He called on the Force again for a little extra strength and pulled himself to the branch's top side. It was wide enough for him to lay flat on. He rested there, spine balanced on bark, breathing hard and staring at the layered green leaves overhead. It was hot here, too hot for the flight suit. He was already slick with sweat. He tried to gather his thoughts. This tree seemed like a safe place to stay, for the moment, but he had no way to contact the other Jedi. His seat had a short-range comm transmitter attached, but there was no way to know if it had survived the ejection or its recent fall. He had to check. Carefully, slowly, using the Force to guide his descent, Ben made his way branch by branch down to the lower level. When he dropped onto the forest floor, he was struck by how pliable and damp the mulch-covered soil was. Not quite muddy, but far from solid ground. This place probably got a lot of rain, he reckoned, and not much sunlight. He crouched beside the ejection chair, now lying on its side, and checked the transmitter's compact box beneath the seat. It was all dark, no lights at all. He flicked the power switch several times. Nothing. He tried smacking it. No good. Optimism was getting very difficult. Ben was sweating fiercely. He unzipped his jumpsuit halfway and let its upper half clump around his waist, with only a thin, white shirt beneath. Damn it, he could use some rations, and drinkable water, and a working comm system. He had none of those, which meant he had to fall back on the Force. Still squatting beside the chair, Ben closed his eyes and tried to reach out. He remembered the Jedi he'd tried to help. He didn't know if she was close by or even if she'd survived, but maybe he could locate her. If not her, then Jallu or one of the others in orbit, assuming they were also alive. Ben felt something. It was like nothing he'd even felt before. He'd known Zonima's second strange, sentient forests and the insidious jungles of Abeloth's prison world, but he'd never been anywhere like this. The Force was so patchy here. He sensed vivid life, growing plants, sleeping animals, buzzing insects, avians rustling branches overhead. Everything you'd expect from a jungle, but intensity mingled with flecks of absolute void. The Force was a chaotic stew of being and non-being. He didn't understand. He couldn't find any Jedi in this mess either, nor could he reach beyond it. Then, when his optimism was just about gone, Ben felt something. A conscious mind brushed his through the tangles. It was pulling him in a certain direction, beyond the tree, to his right, up and over an ascending ridge, deeper into the forest. Maybe the foul-up rookie was helping him after all. Ben tried to reply. He didn't know what got through this tangled mess. Then he followed the direction of her tug. He crossed the ridge, went downhill again, and skirted around broad and shallow patch of muddy water. Then he went uphill once more. The rise was steep enough that he had to use his hands to pull himself up. When he reached the top, a tangle of thick-trunked trees spread across a flat landscape. Only shifting flecks of daylight made it through the high, layered canopy. Patches of tall grass nonetheless rose among the trunks and carpeted large sections of the forest floor. Ben felt her tugging, however faintly, and followed her pull. Yet when he was in the middle of a patch of waist-high grass, he froze, seized by a sudden terror. It wasn't the Force telling him to be afraid. The Force had simply ceased to be, and that was terrifying. He stepped into one of the empty patches he'd felt before. Yet to his eyes it looked like normal grass. He was trying to decide whether to retrace his steps or power through when he heard a strange sound, midway between a rattle and a hiss. Grass around him began to shift. Instinct took over. Ben backstepped as quickly as he could, but not quickly enough. He felt his bite before he saw it. First it was pressure on the insulated material of his boots. Then the bite jumped up to his leg and tore the fabric of his flight suit. He yelped, kicked, and reached out. His still gloved hands found something firm and fleshy. With a yank, pulled it, whatever it was, and held it at arm's length. Trailing from his fist was a long snake-like body. The dangling tail ended in a hard-pointed tip. Writhing and twitching above his grip was a compact head with an oversized mouth ringed by vicious fangs. Ben couldn't believe it, though he'd seen these things before. A Yuuzhan Vong amphistaff. He still had his lightsaber. Ben groped for it with his free hand. The creature made a hacking sound, and some liquid splattered against the side of his face. He wiped it against his shoulder, best he could, but his skin started to burn. He finally pulled his saber free, pointed his mouth toward the amphistaff's maw, and thumbed the trigger. The blade extended, straight through the creature's head. It died with a scream and a hiss, but its tail flicked in a dying frenzy for 30 seconds before going limp. Ben tossed it away and staggered out of the grass as fast as he could. A Yuuzhan Vong creature. A void in the force. This jungle was full of voids, which meant it was full of these creatures, which meant. He was on the verge of some realization but couldn't complete it. His limbs became heavy, his vision darkened. The skin on his face still burned with amphistaff venom. He tried to shout with his lungs, with the force. The darkness around him got deeper and his knees buckled and dropped. They hit the soil first and the rest of Ben followed. The damp forest floor received him, almost gently. The hangar complex where the town of Dao Khan housed its starships and aircraft was one of the sorriest Jallu had ever seen. It was big enough to fit 3 mid-sized Corellian freighters side by side, but all that remained there now was half of a disassembled T-47 airspeeder, a pair of rusted Aerotech speeder bikes, and an A-9 interceptor that looked like it hadn't been airborne since before the Yuuzhan Vong invasion. The whole structure was dilapidated, with chunks having fallen out of the permacrete roof to reveal stars twinkling through the gaps. Nonetheless, it was where Kreshik's thugs demanded to come as soon as their boxy Y-4 transport set down in the center of town. 24 beings in aged stormtrooper armor disgorged along with the fierce-looking Soren who had to be Shak Kai-Din, Kreshik's top lieutenant. When Shak Kai-Din and his troops entered the hangar, one of the townspeople threw on the overhead lights to reveal the structure's sorry contents. Shak Kai-Din stalked into the hangar's empty center space, where, presumably, Kadia Torren's aged freighter had been docked earlier, and looked around, scowling. He took in the broken airspeeder, the parked bikes, the derelict A-9, and the crates of rusting equipment piled in corners. Jallu watched from the shadowed darkness of one of those corners as Shak Kai-Din spun on the white-haired old human who must have been Dao Khan's mayor. The Soren snarled, "There was a ship right here. I can't smell the exhaust fumes. Who took it?" "I told you before. I have no idea," the man pleaded. Shak Kai-Din slapped him with the back of his clawed hand. The human fell, clasping his face. Jallu squinted but didn't see drawn blood. Shak Kai-Din delivered a kick to the old man's side. "There was a Jedi here. Don't lie to me." "A Jedi?" The man squawked. "I swear, I don't know anything about a Jedi." If what Sefton had said was true, he really didn't. Only a handful of Dao Khan citizens knew Kadia had been in town the past few weeks, waiting for Extirpator to show up. "Well, the Jedi was here." Shak Kai-Din kicked him again. "Right under your stubby human nose. If it went on like this, he'd seriously hurt, even kill the old man." Jallu reached out with the force and found the sword's mind. It was simple and violent but strong-willed, and not easy to sway. But she could stir the minds of his companions. She prodded, and one of the fake stormtroopers said, "Hey, that's good enough. You kill him, you might start a riot. We might never get their crystals." Shak Kai-Din snorted, then spat on the prone man. "Maybe if I kill this old human, we'll get somebody new in charge. Somebody with better motivation. Somebody who doesn't lie to us." "I'm not lying," the old man said, actually weeping. "Maybe there was a Jedi." One of the townspeople who'd been with the mayor said, "I think I saw her. It was a woman." The sword spun around. "A woman. Human." "Yes, but I'd never seen her in town before. She had light skin and dark hair. I thought she might be from another continent, or even off-world." "And you only saw one?" That's right. Who was she with?" The human cringed but admitted, "I think she was with one of the Sefton boys. They live in the old depot off the south side of the square." "Then we'll pay them a visit," Shak Kai-Din snarled. "You heard him, gents. Let's go back to the square." The Soren and his fake Imperial guards walked out of the hangar, leaving the townspeople to gather up their battered mayor and whimper consolation to each other. Revlin Jallu took her leave without being seen. Once she slipped through the hangar's small back entrance, she hurried over the hills at the edge of town, through a cluster of trees to a shallow valley carved by a dead river. It was in this low point that 3 stealth fighters rested, covered by darkness and camouflage tarpaulins. As soon as Jallu entered the valley, glow lamps lit up beneath the nose of her own fighter. She joined Bandy, Manisha, and the old man Sefton beneath the tarpaulin and explained what she'd witnessed. "If your sons are still at the house, they must leave immediately," Jallu told Sefton. "It may already be too late." The human shook his head. We cleared out of the place a day ago. My boys are staying someplace safe, with people they can trust. Jallu was glad. It shamed her when innocents were put in danger, especially when Jedi were trying to help them. We're sorry you got dragged into all this. Bandy put a hand on the older man's arm. It's all right. Sefton insisted. I want to help. Most people here don't know about Jedi, and what they do are rumors for far away that don't have anything to do with the truth. Not me, though. Thank you for believing in us, Jallu told him. Belief. I don't just believe in you people. I saw you, back during the Vong War. I was off Paradine when they came in, ended up stuck in a wave of refugees washed up on Dantooine. The Vong came there too, of course, and it was nasty, awful fighting. The old man looked away. Shadow swallowed his expression. The Jedi, though, they fought with us. They held back the monsters better than anyone could expect. There was this woman, this girl with a lightsaber. Well, I wouldn't be alive if it weren't for her. I don't even know if she made it through the battle, but I never forgot her. And when your Kadia showed up, I thought I had to do right by both of them. Her, and the other girl from 30 years ago. The three Jedi stared at him even after he'd gone silent. His face remained in shadows as he asked quietly, any news about her? Kadia, I mean. Nothing yet, Jallu said. Well, tell me what happens. Sefton tilted his head back into lamplight. His tired eyes were imploring. Even if it's not good, I still want to know. You will, Jallu said softly. He deserved greater repayment for the help he'd given, but she understood that would be enough for him. When Ben woke up, he didn't remember where he was or how he'd gotten there. He was in a forest, seated with his legs splayed in front of him and back propped against a tree. His head ached. When he lifted a sluggish hand, the skin of the right side of his face hurt at the touch. Then he remembered the amphistaff, the spray that had caught one cheek. He remembered spearing it through the mouth with his lightsaber, then collapsing. He touched his waist, then the dirt around him. No lightsaber. No lightsaber anywhere. Panic flared in his muddled mind. He braced hands against the tree bark and tried to rise, but his body was too weak. His backside dropped, roughly hitting the root, and he cursed. Ben heard footsteps. A woman stepped into view from his right side, human, brown hair pulled out of her pale round face. She was dressed in a loose tunic with some kind of bandolier across her chest and a leather belt at her waist. 2 lightsabers dangling from the belt. One of them was his. Then Ben remembered the rest. He looked up at her and said in rasping voice, You're Jedi. Kadia, right? That's right. She stood over him, looking down. Kadia tore on. And you're Ben Skywalker. For some reason she sounded disappointed. He admitted he probably didn't look good right now. He touched his right cheek again and winced. I got sprayed. By an amphistaff. I know. I saw it lying there when I found you. Did it bite you or just spray? It bit at my leg. He slapped his right thigh. I don't think it got through. Kadia crouched. She touched his leg as she looked it over. I don't see blood or puncture marks. Good. But the spit, it is weak. I put some anti-venom cream on your face that should counter the effects, but it's going to hurt for a while. And after that it'll start to swell. Great, Ben grunted. You just happen to have anti-venom for a Yuuzhan Vong amphistaff. She touched the bandolier. He saw now that it contained many small pouches and loops with finger-sized metal capsules threaded through. Each cap seemed a different color. Kadia saw his look and said, Standard wilderness survival kit. People on Paradine carry these whenever they go into the jungle. Sounds like a lovely planet. They don't go in often, but you've got to be prepared in a place like this. They can't afford to rely on other people's help out here. Not even Jedi help, Ben thought sourly, and was reminded why he crashed in the first place. He asked her what happened in orbit. Did they take out the cruiser? I don't know. I crashed a minute after you did. Crashed? Then your ship. It's not going anywhere, she said seriously, but I think the comm might still be working. Anyway, it's shelter from the forest, so we should start heading there once you get your strength back. Shelter, right? Ben touched his cheek one more time. He couldn't tell if it was swelling yet. How'd there get to be Vong amphistaffs here? Well, this sector was where their invasion started. From what the locals say, they just rode right in and rode out just as fast. They didn't totally destroy the ecosystem like they did to some worlds, but they seeded the forest with plenty of their life forms. That made sense. It was what he'd been on the verge of realizing before being attacked. He reached out with the force and felt once more the unsettling mixture of vividness and void that characterized life in these woods. It felt fundamentally wrong. They say Paradine's jungles were pretty nasty, even before the invasion, Kadia told him. Now they're just more so. It's unnerving, just being here, Ben muttered. A place like this shouldn't exit. Don't you feel it? I do, she said quietly. They listened to the buzz of insects, the rustle of branches, the fluting of unseen avians. In a normal forest they'd all be typical, even soothing sounds, but in here they couldn't tell which promised unnatural danger. I don't suppose, Ben sighed, that amphistaffs are the worst thing living here. Not by a long shot. In fact, according to the locals, the amphistaffs here have gotten less dangerous with each generation. Something about their toxins getting less potent as they adapt to the local environment. If that was supposed to reassure Ben, it didn't. Why are people even on this Vong spawn world? It's not like they export their Nova crystals. They should have left decades ago. It's their home. She said it simply but with conviction, like that explained everything. Ben shook his head. Whatever. You've got to have some water in that survival kit, right? Sure. Kadia pivoted and plucked a canteen she'd kept at the small of her back. She crouched before him and handed it over. His gloved fingers brushed her bare ones as he took it. He'd forgotten water could taste so good. How far away is the ship? He asked as he handed it back. Kadia stood and looked around. She kept looking around and Ben got a sinking feeling. You do know the way back, right? Of course I do. It's that way. She stabbed a finger to her left, but after a second's hesitation. Ben tried to rein in his frustration. If he ended up getting killed by some foul-up rookie Jedi, even after she tried to help him. I forgot to say thank you, Kadia said suddenly. Ben looked up at her, blinking. Thanks for saving me in the air, I mean. Taking all 6 ties was really impressive. Ben wanted to ask her what the hell she'd been doing in that freighter in the first place. He wanted to tell her she might have ruined the entire mission with the dumbest distraction job he'd ever seen. But he held it in. Instead he said, it was my mission. Every Jedi on is my responsibility. We already lost one. Rive. I never knew Rive, she said, wincing. I'd never met anyone on this mission except for Jedi Jallu. I still haven't, except for you. I thought you'd be, she trailed off. What? Taller. Older. Ben blinked again. She looked about the same age as him, maybe a little younger, but she seemed younger still. Younger, less certain, but also more earnest. It was an uncomfortable fact of Ben's life that every new person he met knew more about him than he knew about them. He only knew Kadia Toran was a newly made knight on one of her first solo missions. She'd never led gag commandos as a skinny teenager, never mourned a mother, and raged against a beloved cousin, nor chased mind-bended horrors through the mall, and if she'd had her heart broken it hadn't been by a traitorous Sith. And she certainly hadn't had to inherit the mantle of the most famous Jedi in the galaxy. This wasn't the first time he'd encountered a Jedi about his age and thought they seemed young. Which Ben knew meant that he was the one who was older than his years. Ironic, since he'd spent so much of his childhood wishing he could be a grown-up. He'd gotten his wish and often wished he hadn't. I'm plenty old, Ben said gruffly. He extended a hand. I think I can try standing again. Kadia grasped his gloved palm in hers and pulled him up. Ben stood, wavered, but remained upright. He pulled off both gloves, stuck them in the loops of his jumpsuit's belt, and wiped sweaty palms on the fabric. Thank you, he said. You're welcome, Kadia blinked. She was, in fact, taller than he supposed, almost on level with him. You can't take us to the ship, right? Sure, she said, but again after a tiny hesitation. It was the best Ben was going to get. He tried to be thankful for what he had as he let Kadia take the lead. Wherever the Jedi's helpers are, they've gone to ground, Shak Kaiden said. His holo image seemed especially bright against the dim emergency lighting on Extirpator's bridge. Even if I find them, I doubt they'll be able to tell us much. I don't think there's a point in staying here. Disappointed as Kreshik was, he had to agree. You've got our sensors readouts on the crash freighter, right? Yeah, we've got them. We'll go hunting next. Looks like the crash site is still in Dayside. Then alive or dead, I want the Jedi found. There's got to be at least 2 in the jungle. We'll get them, boss. How are things looking up there? Kreshik glanced around his bridge. The space was as busy as he'd ever seen it, and his people were working hard to get the ship functional again. But the Jedi attacks had left a number of systems irreparable. He still didn't know if they could ever get to lightspeed again. We're gonna try restarting the generator soon, he told Shak Kaiden. I've got another plan to draw the rest of the Jedi out. Focus on getting the ones that crashed. Got it, boss. I'm on my way. The holo winked out. Kreshik blinked until his eyes adjusted to the surrounding gloom, then walked over to the crew quit. He squatted beside the gunnery section and said, Got a target for me, gents. A couple towns just came into turbolaser range, another Sanayasin replied. Maps say they're Dal Home, Dal Ref, and Dal Feek. We already got Dal Feek's crystals, Kreshik decided. We don't need it anymore. Lock on target, warm the guns, and get ready to fire. The weapons crew hurriedly complied. Kreshik rose from his crouch and stalked over to the front of the bridge. Those big Imperial-style viewports currently looked out on the stars, with only a hint of daylight glow coming off Paradine's green curve. He wouldn't get to see Dal Feek light up with his own eyes. Nonetheless, he felt a rush of power like bygone imp captains must have loved. He waited a minute, still facing the viewport, then called, Target acquired, gents. Got it, boss. Turbo's hot and ready. Standing by, boss. Kreshik grinned. Then let him have it. 10 blasts. Extirpator shuddered very slightly as his ventral cannons unleashed hell on the town far below. After 10 rattles, Kreshik waited until Yorkin called from the sensor station. Direct hits, boss. That town's on fire. Good. Sladak, warm up the comms. Prep a transmission on the broadest frequency. I want all those Jedi to know exactly who they're dealing with. They reached the ship in the end, after Kadia led them down 2 false paths through the forest. On return, the crash freighter looked even worse than she remembered. The boat was bored into the dirt and the burnt-out cones of its engines jutted toward the treetops at a 45-degree angle. The landing ramp on its belly was half buried and inoperable, and the side airlock was only reachable if you were a Jedi and could give yourself a vertical 3-meter boost. At least the lights inside were still on. So were some of the consoles, including the one for communications. But after sitting down and struggling with it for a minute, Ben turned to her and scowled. You said the comm still worked. I said I thought it might be working. He mostly succeeded in not rolling his eyes. Well, it's dead. I don't know how we're going to get their attention now. The ship cut a good streak through the forest. It'll be visible. Only if they know what part of the planet to look on. You can't reach for them in the Force? She asked. No. Everything down here is this garble. I could barely find you when you called. For some reason that surprised her. Kadia hadn't known what to expect from the son of the legendary Luke Skywalker. He was already a hero in his own right, more than she could ever hope to be. She'd assumed, irrationally it seemed, that he'd be able to accomplish things that were beyond her. I'm sorry about the comm, she muttered. This ship wasn't in great condition, even before it crashed. Then why the hell did you grab it? Ben snapped. She'd known he was frustrated, but he'd kept it under control. Now he turned angry eyes on her. This was the best ship they had at Dal Khan, she insisted. I had to make do with it. They don't have much out here. It's why they need our help in the first place. Why did you get any ship? What were you thinking? I was supposed to distract them and draw the ties away from the cruiser. She stiffened. That's what I did. You forced me to fly off and rescue you, and almost got us both killed. It maybe mucked up the attack on Extirpator too. He waved a hand. There were better ways you could have distracted them. You could have started a riot in one of the cities. You could have attacked one of their ships on the ground. Hells, you could have sent Kreshik a bunch of insults about his mother. There was no reason to make yourself a target. What was I supposed to do? Make the people on Paradine targets instead? Because that's what all those would have done. I thought we were supposed to save these people, not get them killed. Ben's face scrunched in a scowl. They wouldn't have gotten killed. Yes, they would have. Kreshik's bombed whole towns for resisting. Hundreds dead. A Jedi is supposed to solve problems without risking innocent people. Right? She stared, matching his anger with defiance but wondering if this Skywalker really did know more about being a Jedi than she did. Instead, Ben relented. He looked at the deck. Maybe you're right, he said, but there must have been a better way. Maybe, she admitted. I had to work with what was available, which isn't a lot here. Fair enough. His eyes twitched to the console, still avoiding her. I guess we have no choice but to sit and wait, and hope everyone else got the job done. He sounded extremely unenthused with the prospect. She didn't say anything as he started fiddling with the console again, trying to get the comm working. Kadia was about to go to the supply room in the back when they heard a muffled rumbling sound. Ben's head perked up. A ship? I don't think so. Kadia walked awkwardly across the slanted deck to the open airlock. The wind outside was strong and damp. Looks like a storm. They got a lot of these here. They come and go fast. Is it cloudy out there? She peered through gaps in the trees. I think so. Great. Then they'll never see us. Ben kicked a bulkhead in frustration. Like I said, the storms go fast, Kadia muttered. He said nothing and wasted time with the console again. Kadia went to the cargo hold and scoured for supplies. There was another bandolier there, a standard wilderness survival kit like she was wearing, but she didn't know if Ben would want one. She wasn't sure if she should even offer. He was trapped, frustrated, and apparently blamed her for this mess. She heard rain pounding the roof of the ship while she was in the hold, but it had already dissipated to a drizzle by the time she returned to the cockpit. Ben had given up on the consoles and sat in the pilot seat, arms crossed, looking at the dirt-covered viewport. Kadia took the spare bandolier and draped it across the back of the co-pilot's chair. Here, she said, in case you want it. Ben merely looked at it. I was hoping to avoid a trek through the woods. Just in case. He reached out, running fingertips across the pouches and small canisters. What are these things? They are not weapons, and they can't all be anti-venom. The people on Paradine have had decades to get used to Yuuzhan Vong life forms. They know they can't get rid of them, but they've come up with some pretty clever ways to work around them, even make use of them sometimes. Ben gave her a go-ahead look, but before she could explain, another muffled thunder sound tore the air high above. We just had a storm, Ben said. Do they come in waves like this? Not usually, she frowned. Kadia crept back to the airlock and peered out once more. Though it was hard to see the sky from this deep in the forest, she didn't feel any strong wind, nor smell the familiar scent that usually presages storms. Then the thunder sound returned. This time, with her head outside the ship, she could hear it more clearly and realized it wasn't thunder at all. Still clinging to the airlock's frame, she bent back into the freighter and called, It's not a storm, it's a ship. Ben joined her with impressive speed. He slung the bandolier across his chest as he gripped the door frame and stuck his head outside to peer at the sky. The initial roar of a starship cutting atmosphere had softened to the drone of engines at low intensity. Somebody had seen them and was coming in to get them. Kadia's brief flash of elation quickly tempered. Somebody was coming for them, but they couldn't tell who. Ben had the same thought. He put one hand on his lightsaber and said, I'm going topside. What if they're not friendly? Then I'll find out real fast. And then what? This ship won't be any shelter if they've got weapons. Then we'll have to lose them in the jungle. He detached his lightsaber. Should be easy. We already got lost once. Then, with the Force to assist him, he jumped straight upward, onto the roof of the freighter. Kadia hesitated for a second, then followed. Ben's leap carried him farther than hers. He landed on the ship's slanted back and was staring up through the sky blue tear the crash had carved in the forest canopy. As Kadia scrambled over the edge and stood upright, she looked up too. There was a ship all right, and it saw them. All she could make out at first was the light shining in her face. It was holding position no more than 10 meters above them. If this was fellow Jedi come to save them, they might have felt something in the Force. All Kadia could sense was the same chaotic, dangerous tangle she always found in this jungle. Then the ship shifted position, drawing closer. The light slipped from her eyes and she caught its shape, boxy, far taller than it was wide, with the stub of a cockpit on the box's upper corner. An Imperial Model Y4 transport, without a doubt. "Ben," she called. "I know," he responded, just before one of the Y4's heavy side doors swung open. A dozen bodies fell on unspooling fiber cables. By the time they hit the back of the freighter, the Jedi had already raced to its edge. Ben ignited his lightsaber. Kadia followed a second later. Glancing quickly over shoulder, she saw men in stormtrooper armor, holding rifles. "Go," Ben called, and without using hands shoved Kadia off the edge of the ship. She barely had the presence of mind to soften her impact and she landed on all fours in the dirt. Above her, laser bolts tore sang the air, and she heard the hum of Ben's fanning saber. She pushed herself upright, grabbed her weapon off the ground, and looked up. Blue stun bolts flashed against the sky. Then Ben threw himself over the edge, landing beside her with much more grace. "They want us alive," she gasped. "For now," Ben grunted. "Come on." He grabbed her arm with his hand this time, and pulled her as he ran. Kadia shook him free and sprinted on her own as quick as she could over the damp, unsolid earth. As they plunged into the woods, she glanced back and saw their attackers jumping off the back of the ship and landing ungracefully in the dirt. A few bolts flashed in their direction. The Jedi had no choice but to keep running, deeper into shadow. "You may have messed up my ship, but you haven't beaten us. Not even close." Dogfight went from a town to a pile of rubble in 60 seconds. In 30 minutes, we're going to pound another town to ash. I haven't decided which yet. That means you Jedi listening out there have 30 minutes to surrender, unless you want hundreds more of those poor, innocent, pathetic little civvies down there to get glassed. And to those poor innocent civvies listening, know you can save your hides if you hand over any meddling scum who are risking your lives by hiding under your skirts. I look forward to hearing from you all. You know where to find me. The voice crackled over the speaker and resounded with menace in the cramped space of Jallu's cockpit. It wasn't a live transmission. It was a recording of the message every halfway functional receiving device near Paradine had picked up 18 minutes ago. Which meant, in just 12 minutes, hundreds more people were going to die. I say we go in there and knock out his bridge right now. See the time and Drake over the Jedi Sharecom line. 8 stealth fighters drifted in the black 2,000 kilometers away from Extirpator. Bandi and Manisha's fighters were still parked outside Dao Khan, which was thankfully on the far side of the planet from the cruiser's drift in orbit. They'll be looking out for us this time. Even if you succeed, we'll lose people, Manisha transmitted from the ground. I'm willing to risk it, insisted Drake. What if we fail and lose half our number? Scoundham asked. This would be an even greater disaster. We can't just let him destroy more towns, another Jedi insisted. Have we heard anything from Skywalker? Begged another. Anything at all? Jallu said, nothing. And because the Jedi Order is not a democracy, that means the final decision is mine. The others fell silent, out of respect and, she felt, because none of them actually wanted the responsibility of making the choice. When she'd first heard Kreshik's ultimatum, an option had presented itself, and no better one had occurred to her in the succeeding 2 short minutes. It wasn't a good option, but it was the only one she could find that wasn't guaranteed to waste lives. 10 minutes left. Jallu said, we have a small advantage. Kreshik does not know how many of us there are. Therefore, I'm going to do as he asks and offer myself in surrender. You can't, blurted one of the younger knights. Bandi, however, replied thoughtfully. He'll never believe you alone caused all that damage. I know. That's why I'd like 3 more of you to volunteer to come with me. The others will remain at this distance. Bandi, Manisha, As soon as you can get spaceborne again, I'd like you to join the group. Absolutely, said Bandy, but how can you be sure Kreshik won't blow you away on sight? I don't, she said, but if only 4 of us surrender, I believe he'll suspect more of us are out there and try to question us. They will torture you then, rasped Scowl Nim. Perhaps, Jallu admitted. That is why I'm asking for volunteers. Silence buzzed over the comm line until Drake said, all right, I'm with you. 2 more Jedi added their voices. 9 minutes left. Thank you all, Jallu said. She tried not to show fear, in her voice or in the Force. I will try to stay in contact with the rest of you as long as I'm able. And may the Force be with you. Kreshik's murderous thugs had earned Ben's unhappy respect. They were persistent. They pursued their quarry through the forest, over ridges, across glades, even though patches of amphistaff-infested grass. Somebody on their team must have had experience in wildness tracking, which was something Ben, in all his adventures, had never bothered to pick up. After many stops and starts, it seemed like he and Kadia had lost their pursuers, but they thought that before. In this damned force-mangled jungle, there was no way to know if they were truly safe. Relief came, ironically, with another storm. Thunder cracked, clouds roiled, a wet and fragrant wind made the trees chatter. The Jedi had been skirting the edge of a steep bare rock slope at the time, and as the first rain fell, Kadia pointed out what looked like the mouth of a cave. They got beneath the stone overhang just as the downpour started in full. I guess the Force is with us, she said as water came in torrents just meters away. She grinned, exhausted but relieved. It was the first time he'd seen her smile. Nobody could move through the jungle in this. Not Jedi, not angry pirates, not even, Ben hoped Pharaoh Yuuzhan Vong monstrosities. Everyone had no choice but to bunker down and wait it out. How long did you say these storms lasted? He asked her. Could be 5 minutes, could be hours. She shrugged. It's not like I can hook into a weather satellite and check. With his life shockingly not in danger, Ben realized how hungry he was. He patted down the survival kit he strapped across his chest before leaving the ship. He still didn't know what all these canisters were for, but he doubted they were edible. He felt the pouches for food, hoping for even unpalatable rations. Here, Kadia said. He looked up and saw she was offering something small and sealed. Ben took it, tore the wrapper, and took a bite. He took another, chewed, and swallowed. That's the least awful ration bar I've ever had, he decided. I'd say it almost tastes good. Everything they eat is natural here. Homegrown. Kadia took a bite of her own ration bar. Don't ask me what's in them, though. I don't want to know. Ben laughed lightly. He scarfed the bar down in a minute. With nutrients in his body, he felt a little better. Outside, the rain continued to pour. Kadia patted down her bandolier and said, You have a glow lamp. Ben looked at his own kit. I don't think so. Wait, maybe this thing. The small metal cylinder was like a quarter-sized lightsaber, and when he tapped the button on his blunt end, it cast a narrow beam of light. When he flicked it around, he saw that the cave bore deep into the hillside. I wonder how far this goes, Kadia said. Could be a place to hide. Ben shook his head. The entrance is too obvious. If they search in here, we are more likely to get trapped. I guess you're right. Still, we could take a look, Ben said, and began stepping deeper into the cave. Kadia followed behind him. They didn't get far before the cavern roof dropped low and forced them into an awkward half-crouch. Water tinkled somewhere deeper in the dark. It probably gets narrower from here, Ben said. I don't think there's much point in going deeper. We can head back, then. But as Ben turned around, his lamp swept across a pair of eyes that reflected his glow. He froze and swung his light back to the spot. Nothing except stone. What? Kadia asked. Did you see something? Ben reached out with the Force, trying to confirm the presence of other life nearby. He got nothing at all. Which was only more alarming. Let's get out of here, he said, already backstepping. Into the storm. At least to the... That was all he got before they leaped into view, creatures standing a meter high on 2 thick legs, long tails and necks held parallel to the ground, hooked claws tipping four-toed feet and short hands. 3 of them emerged from the darkness at the same time, then more followed. Ben dropped the glow lamp and grabbed his lightsaber, turning it on just before one of the creatures leaped on him, hook-clawed feet first. His blade swept out, intercepting the creature without cutting through it, knocking it to the ground without killing it. "Run!" Ben shouted, but Kadia was already doing that. Lightsabers blazing, both Jedi retreated toward the mouth of the cave. When Ben dared to look back, he saw even more of the Vong-formed carnivores slinking out of the depths and giving chase. Looking back was a bad idea. His foot caught an uneven rock. He fell, lightsaber slicing through stone floor before spilling from his hand and deactivating. His chest hurt from impact, but he rolled onto his back and tried to call the saber back as the creature swarmed for the kill. Then Kadia jumped in, putting herself between him and the creatures. She held her lightsaber, a bright golden blade, to her side with her left hand while her right swung wildly in front of her. Ben wanted to shout at her to kill the damn things, but the creatures didn't charge. They stopped and clustered in an agitated semicircle as Kadia continued to wave her free hand at them. "Get out of here," she shouted. "Go, go." And to Ben's shock, they went. They scampered along the far wall of the cave past the 2 Jedi and darted toward the cavern mouth, into the continued rush of rain. The small, quick, deadly Vong-formed beast kept going, one after another. Ben watched almost 20 dart outside and disappear into the deluge. And then, finally, the exodus stopped. The only sounds in the cave were the frantic breathing of 2 Jedi and the drumming of exterior rain. Kadia had turned off her lightsaber and stuck it in her belt. Ben grabbed his own weapon and struggled upright. What he'd seen made no sense. He knew Jedi who could communicate with animals and even command wild ones, but those were Yuuzhan Vong creatures. The Force had no sway over them. "What did you do?" Ben gasped. "How could you?" "Just a trick." She turned to face him, smiling almost shyly, and held out her right hand. It was one of the small canisters kept in their bandoliers. She squeezed its orange cap, and it released a puff of air, lightly scented, with a pneumatic hiss. "Those were Kissite," she told him. "They're pack hunters. One of them's no problem, but when they gang up on you." "We could have been mincemeat." Ben gestured at the canister. "What is that?" "Pheromones." She tucked it into her bandolier. "The Kissite can't stand it. One whiff of it and they run away. The locals on Paradine haven't been living with Vong life for 30 years, and they've discovered different creatures respond to different chemical compounds." She touched other colored caps. "This one's for warding off Kissite. This green one's for Ferozine. The purplish one drives away amphistaffs. You get the idea." Ben stared. "That's amazing. It makes sense, doesn't it? The Yuuzhan Vong had to have a way to tame all their nasty creatures. The Paradians probably just cooked up the same pheromones the Vong used." "I guess so. They've gotten pretty good at it." She fingered more color-coded capsules. "This black one, with the red stripe, that actually attracts the Kissite. The purple stripe does the same for amphistaffs." His face scrunched. "Why would you ever want that?" She shrugged. "I don't know about the Kissite, but some people in Dal can't collect amphistaff venom. Apparently there's ways to make medicine out of it." "Huh. That's surprisingly sophisticated." "What's surprising about it?" She frowned with a flash of anger. "Just because the Paradians live on the edge of the galaxy doesn't mean they're fools. Or helpless." "I never thought that," Ben insisted, and wondered if it was true. Kadia began walking slowly toward the cavern mouth. Rain was falling lighter than before, but the sky was getting darker. They may have been moving into nighttime. As Ben followed, she said, "This is the kind of planet where people adapt to their environment, not the other way around. You didn't come from a world with lots of nature, did you?" He thought on places he'd known as a child and a youth. The ill-named haven in the mall, Coruscant itself, the old Jedi temple on Ossus he'd rarely ventured beyond, the Millennium Falcon, and the Jade Shadow. "I didn't exactly come from anywhere," he said, "but you're right. Not much wild nature." She turned around. This time her frown was softer, concerned. Everybody's got to come from somewhere. I didn't have the most stable childhood. He wanted to say, you have to know this. Everyone knows everything about me. Which wasn't true, but it often felt so. Kadia walked to the cavern mouth to look at rain and gathering darkness. As he approached from behind, she asked, you probably spent a lot of time on Coruscant growing up, right? Among other places. I don't go there often now, since things between the Alliance and the Jedi are complicated, she finished. Kadia leaned against the rough stone wall and crossed arms. Do you like Coruscant? It can be overwhelming, but most of the time I do. In fact, he often missed it. He hadn't thought he would, but he did. He enjoyed the clamor, the endless sleepless life, the fact that you had to try to become bored. He liked being in a place where history was always being made. But Kadia said, it sounds like a nightmare to me. You've never been there. I've never been to any core world. The most populated planet I've been to was Eriadu. It felt like a slaughterhouse. Coruscant's better than Eriadu. Well, most of it is. She said nothing. Ben watched her watch the rain and remembered he still knew next to nothing about her. He asked, what about Asas? You must have spent time there. Only a little. My master liked to move around. Who's your master? A woman named Klin Faji. Do you know her? Not well, Ben said. She was a human about 15 years older than he was. One of those somewhat errant Jedi who didn't clash with Ben's father but didn't pay much attention to official edicts either. She was the one who found me on Kuchikar. I'd have never entered a Jedi if not for her. Probably wouldn't have learned what a Jedi was. She trailed off, still watching the rain. Ben didn't know what to say, didn't know what she wanted. With help from his father and others, Ben had gotten pretty good at reading people and intuiting their needs. It was part of being a Jedi and part of being a leader. But Kadia was hard for him. Maybe it was this weird force-garbled jungle. Because he could think of nothing else to say, Ben sat down on the cold stone floor with legs stretched in front of him. He told her, take a load off. We could be here a while. Kadia and sat down too, back propped against the side of the cave, but her head was still angled to watch the jungle and the rain. Ben sighed. I think we're moving in tonight. Even if the storm stops right now, the ground's going to be muddy for hours. We're probably going to be stuck here till morning, at least. At least we've got shelter, she said softly. And nobody for company, he agreed. You got any more ration bars? No. Do you? Ben felt around his bandolier, not touching the chemical canisters now that he knew what they contained. He didn't want to call the Kisai back by accident. He went through each of the pouches in the fading light and found 2 more ration packs in white wrappers. One for each of us, he said, and handed her a pack. That'll have to do unless we can find something edible in the jungle. Did the Paridians tell you anything about that? Not really, she said. Great. Just great, Ben sighed. As he watched the rain fall, he grew restless, and then angry. If Kreshik's people were searching the jungle, it meant Extirpator hadn't been taken out. That meant more Jedi might be dead or lost. It definitely meant this mission, his first mission planned and executed, start to finish, had gone bad. When his friend in Alliance Intel had told him about Kreshik and Extirpator, Ben had leaped for the chance to take action, as she'd know he would. He thought this would be the perfect opportunity for the Jedi to help the helpless, specifically the ones the Alliance didn't help. It was the kind of thing that could rebuild the trust between the Jedi and the rest of the galaxy. That was something he thought a lot about nowadays. But where had his ambition and good intentions gotten him? At least one Jedi was dead. Kreshik was running amok, and he was trapped on a backwater planet in a freakish Vong-formed jungle, watching rain turn everything to mud. That was fitting. He felt like he was sunk in the muck, trapped in a quagmire of his own making. It was easy, even tempting, to blame Kadia for her foul-ups, but there'd been 100 ways this mission could have gone wrong. He should have planned better, brought more Jedi. Maybe not even tried at all. As he sunk deeper into his person mess, Kadia said, I love the rain. He looked up at her. She'd spoken so softly he wasn't sure he'd heard right. It was getting darker still, and her profile was made of soft shadows and dim grays. "I don't see anything to love about this," Ben said gruffly. She twisted her head and glanced at him. "Do you know anything about Kujiker?" "It's pretty far out. On the rim, past Hut space, right?" "That's right. It doesn't have many people. More that Paradine, but that's not saying a lot." She pulled her legs up so they folded against her chest and wrapped arms around her knees. "Kujiker has lots of extremes. It's mostly pretty dry, but for about a month every year there's a rainy season. It just rains and rains, the rivers flood, everything turns to muck. People retreat into their houses. They're all built on stilts because of the floods and almost never leave. Everybody just bunkers down and waits for the rains to stop." "What's there to love about that?" "We treat rainy season as the time for families," Kadia said, then stopped. Maybe she remembered Ben's sad and too public history. Then she continued, "The best part is when the rains end. It doesn't come all at once, obviously, but when it fades to a drizzle and the sun starts coming out, everybody goes outside and the world seems bright and clear and new, like you're seeing it for the first time. Rainbows linger in the sky for days as the drizzling stops. That's the happiest time on Kujiker, the Rainbow Festival. Everybody comes out of their houses wearing the brightest colors. They talk and feast and it goes on and on until the last clouds, the last rainbows, go away." The smile on her face was soft and sad with the pure and aching nostalgia the likes of which Ben had never known. In that moment he forgot his own frustrations and envied her instead. "I've missed the past 5 rainbow festivals back home," Kadia said, looking through him now, into the deepening shadows and her own past. "I miss them, but I'm okay with that. Because when Master Klinfa started training me, showing me how to use the Force, it was like a rainbow festival that never ends. The whole world seemed bright and clear and new." She trailed off, then said, barely a whisper, "It still feels like that, once in a while. The Force is like a constant supply of miracles. Even here, in this weird jungle, it has this amazing jagged texture to it. I never thought the Force could be like that, but it keeps surprising me." Ben watched her fading face as she watched the shadows. She seemed young again, but not in the sense of immaturity or inexperience. She seemed young in a good way, open, curious, full of potential and small joys. He tried to remember if he'd ever felt like that, truly young and free from the responsibilities of his name. Even when he'd yearned to be an adult, he'd been old before his time. Slowly, the downpour became a drizzle. Darkness fell. The cavern became so black he could barely see Kadia 2 meters in front of him. Ben realized he'd dropped the glow lamp somewhere deep in the cave and said, "I should go get our light." "What for?" she asked. He didn't answer and didn't get up. They remained in the dark, still and silent, until he said, "I guess we should sleep." "We don't have anything better to do," she agreed. He touched rough rock. "Not exactly comfortable, but I guess we can make do. One of us should keep watch, though." "I can do it," she said. "Are you sure?" "I'll be all right. Just don't sleep on the right side of your face. That swelling's only going to get worse." With all his other troubles, he'd actually forgotten about that. "Sure. Thanks." Ben lowered himself slowly to the rock and lay on his left side, facing away from her, propped head against folded arm. His bed was hard, but the sound of water slowly falling through the still wet forest was actually soothing. His body was tired, more tired than he'd permitted himself to recognize, and within minutes the black cave felt like a cradle and he surrendered himself to sleep. In her time as a Jedi, Revlim Jallu had faced her share of bullies. They came in a variety of species and appearances, but they all shared certain common traits, and one of those was a sadistic pleasure in looking down on others, something Jallu, with her short stature, was unfortunately prone to be victim of. Kreshik was like all the others. When Jallu and the 3 other Jedi set their stealth fighters down in Exterpreter's hangar, they climbed out of their ships and immediately received a volley of stun blasts. Jallu woke up alone, lying in a small bleak cell, with stun cuffs around her wrists and ankles. She reached out for the others in the Force but didn't feel them. Mims, with their fast metabolisms, tended to recover from stun shots quicker than humans. She prayed they were merely asleep. When Kreshik appeared, he came with a pair of guards in ill-fitted stormtrooper armor. The Sanyasin wore battered bronzium plates, perhaps his people's traditional garb, and he stood over Jallu with a sharp-toothed grin and the expected condescending sneer. "What a thing you are," he said in a quiet, gruff voice. "You look so little and helpless, but I bet you're dangerous. Aren't you?" Jallu flexed her sore jaw before speaking. "Where are my comrades?" "Alive. They're slower waking up than you." Kreshik looked at the sharp claws of his right hand. "We searched those pretty black X-wings of yours. They'll be great additions to my collection. We found laser swords in the other 3, but not yours. Where's your weapon, little Jedi?" "I carry no weapons," she said. Kreshik laughed. "Don't tell me Jedi are peaceful. I know what Jedi can do. You're warriors. Self-appointed warriors against whoever you decide is a bringer of darkness or some such rot. I'm not going to argue with you." Jallu called on the Force to lift herself off her side and arrange herself in a seated position. Kreshik didn't seem impressed by her minor show of power. "Right," he said. "You're here to surrender. Just the 4 of you, plus the 2 we shot down. You expect me to believe 6 little Jedi crippled my Star Destroyer?" "Technically, you have a picket ship," she said dryly. "And I didn't come to surrender. I came to negotiate." "Then you admit you've got more Jedi out there in your stealth ships." "I admit nothing," she said. "At least, not at this stage of negotiations." He stared down, judging how seriously to take her. Then he hit her. He slapped her face, palm impacting first, then claw-tipped fingers. Jallu felt skin tear, and new fresh blood was seeping into her fur. "You're my prisoner, little Jedi," Kreshik said. "And if you don't tell me how many of you are out there, I'll have my men put blaster bolts in your friends while they sleep. I'll do it right now." Jallu pushed back the pain and tried to think. He'd not mentioned Ben or Kadia at all, which meant he hadn't found them, alive or dead. She met his glare with battered dignity. "Do you really think you're in the position of strength? You're on my Star Destroyer, little one," he guffawed. But she could sense his insecurity. He'd never met a Jedi before and didn't know what they could do. He'd only heard stories. Which was exactly what she needed. "You have a picket ship," she corrected, "and we've already managed to cripple it." "I see you've gotten some power back, but do you have engines? Hyperdrives?" His right eye twitched. "We will." Which meant no, and she had a feeling lightspeed was especially unlikely. "Even better." Jallu said, "I'll tell you how we crippled your ship. We Jedi have a technique. We load our X-wings with warheads. They have no guidance, no thrusters. They're simply explosives, and we use the Force to move and detonate them. That's how we were able to hit your ship without your sensors noticing. We call them shadow bombs." She felt a tremor of fear from Kreshik, but he said, "So." Jallu tilted her head. "You just brought 4 X-wings into the hangar at the heart of your ship. How many warheads do you think are in each?" His hairless brow twitched. "You wouldn't. You couldn't." "With the touch of the Force, I can crack your prize picket in 2, Jallu said. Frustration mounted in Kreshik, then overflowed. With a snarl, he grabbed her by the scruff of her neck, lifted her off the bed, then threw her skull first into the bulkhead. She fell to the floor, world spinning, only for Kreshik to grab her by the neck again and toss her only the bed. "This is my ship. Mine," he cried, then grabbed a blaster from the guard on his right. For a split second, Jallu felt mortal fear. She'd overplayed her hand. When the blaster's muzzle flashed, it was the merciful blue of a stun bolt, and as numbness reclaimed her, she thought that at least she'd bought Ben and Kadia a little time. When day returned to their section of the jungle, it came slowly, without rainbows or even sunshine. The sun glowed silver through mottled clouds, and a damp morning breeze blew residual drops from high branches, so that sometimes it seemed like fresh showers fell. Kadia watched from the mouth of the cave. Ben was awake too, but they didn't speak. They'd agreed that wandering into the muddy forest with no destination was a bad idea, and that their better option was to stay in the cave and try to reach their Jedi comrades in the Force, assuming those comrades were still alive. They'd also agreed that Ben was the more experienced one and better suited for that task. He sat on the hard stone floor in the classic cross-leg meditation pose, facing the shapeless black depths of the cave. From her place at his mouth, Kadia couldn't see his face, but she could sense his frustration. This weird jungle, half Yuuzhan Vong, half not, was as confounding for him as it was for her. In other situations, it might have been comforting to know she was on the same level as the Jedi Order's Wonder Boy and presumed heir, but right now she just wanted out of here. When they first met, she thought he was young, too young, at least, for all the stories she'd heard about him. And he did look young to the eye, but after speaking to him, feeling him in the Force, and sharing her personal thoughts with him, because she thought last night they might die soon, and who else would she tell? She realized Ben was old after all. He'd been born to a heavy responsibility, and things had gotten worse for all the betrayal and grief he'd sustained. Her own youth hadn't felt simple at the time, because what youth did, but compared to Ben's it had been easy. For 15 years, until she stumbled into Klin Faji, she'd expected nothing more than a life on Kujiker. Her years of awaiting the Rainbow Festival's annual joy were like a treasure box in her memory, a pure and simpler time. Kadia had expected to be impressed and intimidated by the Jedi's Wonder Boy, and she was. She hadn't expected to feel sorry for him also. As if to drive the point home, Ben released a frustrated growl and popped to his feet. He started pacing the narrow space of the cave and said, "I just can't do it. This damned forest is unnatural. The Force doesn't work the way it's supposed to. Back when they were chasing us, I could barely even fight like I'm used to." "I felt that too," Kadia said. "It was like everything was sluggish. My body, my reflexes, everything." He growled again and looked out on the forest. "I wonder if we have any other options. There's no settlements for hundreds of kilometers. The jungle is dangerous. We have barely any food. We can't go back to the freighter. And its comms don't work anyway. The only ship around here worth a damn is the marauders' transport," she finished. They looked at each other. Garbled Force or no, their thoughts clicked into sync. She said, "But if we," he said, "we pretend to surrender, they'll all have weapons. So do we." She touched her lightsaber. "If we surrender, they'll take them. I know. I wish. We do have other weapons," she finished, and touched the bandolier across her chest. "Do you really think it could work?" "It could," she said. "They'd never suspect it. It could get us all killed. Or it could not work at all. In which case we'd be prisoners. Still better than being stuck in the death jungle, as far as I'm concerned." "Right," Ben said. "They might have better food." Kadia laughed, despite the severity of the situation. Hunger or weariness had made her lightheaded. Then she sobered and asked, "Are we really serious about this?" "I don't see a better option," Ben said. "The only thing is, how do we draw the marauders to us? We'd have to find an open space big enough so they could sit down. There's a clearing at the top of this hill. Then what? We wave our lightsabers until they come. That's a little too obvious, isn't it? We can't start a signal fire." Ben patted his bandolier. "How? I don't have any fire sticks, any lighters." Kadia shook her head. "You Karusket boys. Did nobody teach you wilderness survival?" He looked at her, eyes narrowed. Then he laughed. She did too, but it only lasted a second. "I guess we'll have to do it," Ben said gravely. "Unless you have any last-minute ideas." "That was my last-minute idea." "I thought so." He exhaled, flexed his shoulders, and rubbed the back of his neck. "The beds will be softer on the cruiser too, assuming they don't shoot us." "They won't? At least, they won't kill you. You're too valuable a hostage." She hadn't meant to sound accusatory, but maybe she did. Ben frowned and looked into the depths of the cave. She was afraid she'd hurt him and opened her mouth to apologize when he spoke instead. "I was thinking last night. I told you I didn't really come from anywhere. You said everybody comes from somewhere, and I guess you're right. But somewhere doesn't have to be a physical place." He was turned so she couldn't see his expression. Kadia asked, "Where do you come from, then? Where do you think?" That took her back. "I don't know. All I really know are the stories. Exactly. I came from a story. A story of Skywalkers and Solos and Jedi and Sith going back way before I was born. Sometimes I tried to fight it. Nowadays I try to live up to it, mostly, but that's just as stressful. I'm sorry, she muttered. Don't be. He turned around. I am what I am. Nowadays I just try to be the best me possible. But I was thinking, if I die here, if I get killed by some hopped-up bully on some planet I never even heard of until yesterday. Well, that'd be spitting in the eye of destiny, wouldn't it? Teenage me would have loved that. Except for the dying part. This time he laughed, dry and briefly. She didn't join in. Ben didn't seem to mind. He waved at the jungle and said, let's get this over with. Do your thing, nature girl. Chapter 3. When the Y4 transport descended over their cleared bit of hilltop, Ben was afraid that it wouldn't set down, that instead it would hover 10 meters above their heads and deploy soldiers with fiber cables to rappel down and grab the Jedi, even though there was enough room to land. That would ruin their ill-conceived plan. It held position for nearly a minute and he thought they might do just that, or use external cannons to blast both Jedi to ash. But his enemies obliged him. Always a good start. Ben and Kadia stepped to the edge of the clearing, lightsabers inert, but in hand, as the Y4 set is tall, narrow hull down on the rock. The panel on his right side swung open, and a group in scuffed, poorly-worn stormtrooper armor charged out brandishing antique 11 rifles. It was probably the same bunch who'd been chasing them through the forest yesterday. The Jedi stayed where they were, without igniting their lightsabers. They waited as the fake stormtroopers formed a loose semicircle around them and watched as a tall-snouted reptilian in dark armor walked out of the transport last. It wasn't Kreshik. He was supposed to be a Sanyasin, but this one had the swagger of someone who thought he was in charge. Put the weapons down, he growled, or we'll blast you where you stand. Nice to see you again, Shak-Kai-Din, Kadia called. The sword turned his small dark eyes on her. And who are you, girl? Were you the one hiding out in Dao Khan? That's right. Then you're going to tell me all about whatever it was you were up to. Shak-Kai-Din made a hacking sound, then looked at Ben. We'll take you too. Unless you try and fight. Then we'll just kill you. Ben spread his arms. We lit the signal fire because we want to surrender. This jungle will kill us if we don't. No kidding. It already killed 2 of my people. Shak-Kai-Din pointed at Ben's hand. Now drop the damned laser sword. Lightsaber, Ben corrected. Whatever, boy. Drop it. Ben glanced at Kadia. She gave a tiny nod. Together, they stooped low and placed their lightsabers on the ground. Grab the laser swords, Shak-Kai-Din barked, and 2 of his fake stormtroopers rushed in and picked up the weapons, holding them carefully, emitters facing the sky. Then the sword said, snap cuffs on them and take them to the transport. Will that be enough? One of the troopers said. If they do anything funny, shoot. He turned his snarl back on Ben. Shoot to kill. Bad idea, Kadia said, even as she held wrists in front of her to be restrained. That's not a boy over there. That's Ben Skywalker. Shak-Kai-Din blinked. Who? Ben Skywalker, son of Luke Skywalker. You know, the head of the Jedi Order who saved the galaxy more times than anyone can count. And his kid's no slouch either. She nodded fiercely at Ben. That's the heir to the Jedi right in front of you. She was laying in on thick enough to make Ben embarrassed, but they'd agreed to get the point across. Shak-Kai-Din, however, gave a loose shrug. If you say so. Don't kill the boy, gents. I guess he's valuable or something. The fake stormtroopers stepped up and slapped stun cuffs on both their wrists, then began prodding the Jedi toward the ship with the tips of their E11s. Ben stumbled intentionally, going as slowly as possible. If their stupid last-minute plan was going to work, it would have to work fast. While Kadia had been atop the hill, starting the signal fire, with only sticks and stones, Ben had been down in the forest, waving around a capsule of chemicals that, so she claimed, would attract the pack of Kisayat they'd driven away the previous evening. That was assuming that the Kisayat were still remotely close by, that the rain dam air didn't mess up the pheromones, that the chemicals would carry on the limpid post-storm breeze. As he'd done it, Ben had reflected on what an idiotic plan this was, far worse than trying to outrun ties in a Soro Suub junker. But you had to work with what was available. If they survived this, he promised he'd never criticize Kadia for her stupid decisions again. Ben had emptied his chemicals down below, but Kadia still wore her capsule in her bandolier. Their captors took their weapons and bound their hands, but they didn't notice as she tapped the capsule's lid with the force and released more chemicals, creating a trail into the Y4 transport's wide-open portal. Once they were aboard the ship, Ben was reminded that these things had been built to carry Imperial walkers. The deck was long and narrow, but the ceiling towered high above. A long ladder ran up one wall to a catwalk, which he guessed led to the topside cockpit. Most of the bottom level was packed with heavy cargo crates. He thought they might be ransom collected from one of Paradine's villages. Kadia said, "All right, shackle him up, over there." He pointed to some pipes running down the same wall as the ladder. "Then put stun bolts in them and we'll take off." Being unconscious and locked to a wall would be very, very bad if the Kisai had arrived. As he was dragged over, Ben said, "Wait, you don't want to do that." Kadia snorted. "Give me one reason not to, boy." Ben couldn't. He was actually a little surprised they hadn't stunned them outside and carried their limp bodies into the ship instead of marching them over. But as his stun cuffs were locked to the pipeline, Kadia said, "If you shoot him, you will kill him." "I said stun bolts." Kadia repeated. "You'll still kill him," Kadia insisted. He's got a rare heart condition." "What?" The reptilian balked. Ben almost said the same. "I'm serious," Kadia repeated as she, too, was shackled to the wall. "It's defect he was born with. If you shoot him, even with the stun bolt, it'll cause Ben's heart to go into palpitations until he bursts his aorta. He'll die of a heart attack before you ever get him to Kreshik." Kadia looked between the Jedi. "That's ridiculous." "No, it's not," Ben begged. "Please, this is a dark, deep secret my family's tried to keep my entire life. Now you know, too, which means you can't stun me." The sword snout twisted in confusion, disgust, or both. "Oh, whatever," he said. "Just shoot the girl." A trooper lifted his rifle and aimed. Kadia opened her mouth to beg but couldn't find words. Not this time. Her terrified eyes met Ben's, and they said, "I guess it didn't work." That was when the cavalry arrived. In this case, the cavalry was 24 screeching, slashing Vong-formed Kisayat. Drawn by the pheromone trail left by the Jedi and driven into a frenzy, the small, fast, and deadly carnivores rushed in through the Y4 still open portal. The fake stormtroopers, even more surprised than the Jedi, were slow to respond. Some opened fire, but most still had their E11s on a stun setting, and the blue bolts crackled pointlessly against the beast's thick hides. The troopers' white armor provided protection against the Kisayat's slashing claws, which only encouraged the creatures to pin their enemies down and hack at them again and again, like they were cracking eggs with tasty yolk inside. The Kisayat mobbing the stormtroopers gave Ben and Kadia extra seconds to save themselves. Ben had never let his attention wander from the trooper who'd taken his lightsaber, and now that said trooper was pinned to the ground, desperately trying to push back a snapping carnivore. It took a simple tug of the force to lift his weapon off the floor and send it into his hand. The familiar weapon was welcome in his palm. Ben tapped the button, ignited the blade, and leaned forward, quick but careful, to slice the blazing tip through the binds connecting Kadia's shackles. As soon as her limbs were free, she called her own lightsaber off the deck and easily freed Ben. By then, a few Kisayat had crawled over the rampart of writhing fake stormtroopers and were heading for the Jedi. Ben and Kadia both leaped for the ladder and scrambled up his rungs as fast as they could. Kadia got there first, but Ben was right behind her. Twice her boot almost smacked his skull, while a Kisayat snapped at his heel from below. Thankfully, the Vong-formed creatures had neither the brains nor the physiology to climb ladders, and when the Jedi reached the catwalk, they were safe from the chaos below. "Oh wow," Kadia wheezed as she rolled, exhausted, onto the walkway's metal mesh. "I can't believe that worked." Now let's dump these things and take off. I've got a better idea, Ben said. As he pushed himself to his feet, he looked to the front end of the catwalk, just in time to see Shak Kai-Din slip through a closing door. Before the Jedi reached it, they could hear the Y4's engines rumbling to life. They didn't waste time. Working as one, without any words, Ben and Kadia used their sabers to make smoldering tears in the cockpit door. When they carved a hole big enough to get through, they grabbed the broken slab with the force and pulled it aside, clearing the way. Blaster fire greeted them. Ben moved fast, feeling more clear-headed than any time since the mission began. He charged through the smoking hole and took in the small cabin instantly, one Saniasin in the pilot's seat, plus Shak Kai-Din on his feet, pistol in his claws. Ben deflected 2 shots, then cut through the barrel of Shak Kai-Din's weapon and used the force to pin the sword to a bulkhead. Kadia came in a second later and barked at the pilot to get out of his chair. He complied, trembling, and joined Shak Kai-Din against the wall. "Think you can fly this thing better than the last one?" Ben asked her. "As long as nobody shoots at me." Kadia dropped into the seat and checked controls. "Engines are hot. Repulsors too. We're ready for liftoff." She pointed to his bandolier. "You've got one more capsule. We can drive the Kissite away before we go." "No," Ben snapped. "Close the door and fly. Now. You're taking them with us." "That's my better idea," Ben said, then swung his lightsaber so his blazing tip lit the underside of Shak Kai-Din's snout. "You're going to get us on board, extirpator." Despite the saber in his face, Shak Kai-Din snarled, "Suck vacuum. If you don't," Ben pressed, "I'm going to toss you down there with all your friends and the Kissite. I don't think you'll last long without any armor." The sword kept snarling, but this time he didn't argue. Ben stayed on his feet, holding his captives against the bulkhead, while Kadia closed the doors, fired engines, and pushed them away from the jungle. The sky was luminous and clear, and for the first time in what seemed like forever, so was the Force. It wasn't always about luck. Sometimes it came down to planning or improvisation. Sometimes it was about fixing your mistakes as soon as you'd realize you'd made them. Kreshik wasn't too proud to admit his screw-ups and fix them. It had taken longer than he'd wanted, but his crews had gone into the 4 captured X-Wings and removed their armaments. In addition to standard proton torpedoes, they included, as suggested, modified shadow bombs with propulsion and tracking removed and replaced with extra explosives. Kreshik didn't know for certain the Jedi could remote detonate those with their minds, but he wasn't taking any chances. Those bombs were nasty pieces of work. He'd ordered his crew to eject them all into space. It felt a shame to waste good weapons, especially when Extirpator was in such bad shape. But again, no chances. Not when you were facing Karkin Jedi. He'd come to the bridge to watch the disposal of the torpedoes, and he was about to go down and interrogate another Jedi when Slaydak reported a hail from Shak Kai-Din, who had the best news yet. "We've got both of them, boss. Both Jedi." The sword's voice was a little rent by static, but the words were clear. "They both alive?" Kreshik asked. "They're in good condition. And you'd never believe it, but one of them is a big catch. He says he's the son of the boss Jedi. It's a human named Skywalker, or something." "You serious?" He thought the head honcho Jedi was called something else, but he couldn't remember what. "Really serious. Is the hangar operating? It'll be ready for you? We've got 4 Jedi in our brig now, but I think there's more out there. They've fancy stealth X-Wings. Be real careful." 4 Jedi. Shak Kai-Din echoed. "How'd you manage that?" "I blasted Dogfight and said I'd burn another town if they didn't surrender. So of course they did. At least, some of them. Say, you've still got the crystals from Dogfight, right?" "Yeah, boss, they're in the hold." "Good. We'll offload them after the Jedi." "Sure. What about engines?" "We're about to get sublights online. Hyperdrive. We'll talk about that when you're aboard." After a tiny pause, Shak Kai-Din replied, "Okay, boss. See you in a minute." Kreshik closed the connection. Slaydak, seated at the comm station, asked him, "Hyperdrive's dead, isn't it?" totally out of commission. Looks that way, Kreshik grunted, which meant getting out of this system was going to be complicated. Tricky, but not impossible. He waited on the bridge until Yorkin reported that the Y4 was inbound and heading for the landing bay. He decided interrogating the other Jedi could wait. He wanted to see the prince brought back in shackles. If he really was child of Luke Skywalker, or whatever the name was, then he'd be all the ransom needed to bargain for necessary repair parts. And really, what were the odds that a Jedi prince would fall into his lap, especially at this worthless excuse for a planet? About as great as finding a derelict but operable Imperial Star Destroyer, he figured. Luck was still with him. Kreshik strolled through his ship's corridors with a happy spring in his step. And then, as he rode the turbolift down to the hangar level, his comlink buzzed urgently in his pocket. Kreshik took it out and grunted, "What? Who is it?" "Boss, it's hangar control," yelped a panicked voice. "The transport is got. We can't hold them back." "What the hells are you taking about?" Kreshik sneered. "It's Jedi, and they have monsters with them." He was too stunned to speak. Then the turbolift shuddered around him. Its overhead lights flickered, dropping him into black before coming back on, but the lift continued to tremble. That was when Kreshik realized his luck had left him for good. Beaten and weary, locked alone in a prison cell, Jallu was the closest she'd ever come to giving into despair. Then her fellow Jedi appeared to her in the Force, a brilliant beacon of hope. She felt them on their approach, Bandy, Manisha, and the others who stayed behind in their stealth fighters, but also the one she'd most wanted to feel, Kadia Toran and Ben Skywalker. They were alive, and they were coming here. Jallu did her best to weave a Force bond between them, and while she didn't glean everything that passed between the Jedi, she got enough. Ben and Kadia were going to land aboard Extirpator. Of the 6 remaining Jedi and stealth fighters, 2 were to remain in space and harass the picket ship as best they could. The other 4 would follow close to Ben and Kadia's ship, presumably relying on heat from its thrusters to mask their flight signature until they could all get inside the hangar. Ben and Kadia seemed to have some other weapon to use against Kreshik's pirates, though the Force gave her no clue what. It didn't matter, she supposed. All Jallu had to do was wait for rescue. Seated in her cell, upright, still bound at wrists and ankles, she closed her eyes and let events come to her. She felt panic wash through Kreshik's crew when 6 Jedi, plus whatever that extra surprise was, dropped into the hangar. She felt the determination of the Jedi themselves, none stronger than Ben Skywalker. It was glorious to feel him, not just alive, but singing with confidence. She knew how much this mission weighed on the young man. It has been a challenge and responsibility he's set for himself, but he's strained under its pressure. Failure or death would have been disastrous for him and the whole Jedi Order, and they had seemed perilously close to both. But no more. Somehow, the Jedi were sweeping through the ship. Just a handful of them were enough to send Kreshik's pirates running. It was glorious to feel, and a little confusing, but Jallu sat for a while, basking in it and waiting for someone to come for her. She reached out the other Jedi and let them know where she was, but they seemed to be taking their time getting to her. She felt Teeman Drake declare himself free from another cell, but still, she was locked in her place. Jallu sighed. A problem with heroic, ambitious young Jedi was that they sometimes forgot to look after her own. Well, she supposed it was their prerogative. She removed herself from their loose battle meld and focused on herself. Specifically, she gripped the metal bonds that held her hands and feet and, with only the Force, snapped them. Then, with shackles at wrist and ankle but limbs free, she walked over to the door of her cell. The sliding panel was locked, of course, but she no longer felt the 2 guards that had been posted outside. In fact, the whole corridor seemed empty. She placed a small hand on the door, and she knew the door. She knew every lock and mechanism, every gear and pivot and how they all connected. Calling on the Force once more, she wrenched it open. It only jerked halfway clear before jamming, but that was enough to slip her body through. She stood in the empty, still corridor. She heard sounds in the distance, possibly growing closer. She heard the cry of blaster fire, the hum of lightsabers, and what sounded like cracking and scraping, like somebody was slashing armor with a weak vibroblade. She heard other noises too, like the growling and yapping of animals. What in the world had Ben and Kadia brought aboard? She started down the corridor cautiously, and almost got to the end when she heard the skitter of claws on metal. It occurred to her that maybe she'd have been better off in her cell. It raced around the corner, some creature with a long body powered by twin legs and sickle-shaped claws jutting from his long feet and small hands. His yapping mouth was decidedly unpleasant too. Jallu raised a wall in the force to throw the monster back. It charged right through, like the force didn't affect it at all. Yes, she really should have stayed in her cell. Jallu turned to run, knowing she'd never made it, when she heard the creature howl. She looked back and saw a dark-haired human in the corridor, Kadia Torn. She had her gold lightsaber in her left hand, but her right contained a small capsule of some kind of aerial spray. She was puffing it in the face of the strange creature, and the creature was repulsed by it. Indeed, it reversed course and scampered in the other direction, down the hall, away from the Jedi. Panting, Kadia spun on Jallu and asked, "Are you okay? Did it hurt you?" Jallu stood straight and tried not to tremble. "I am unharmed." Kitty hurried close and bent to look her over. The spray capsule was still in her hand. Now that her sharp-bent nose caught a whiff of it, Jallu felt like running from the foul reek herself. Kadia looked past her at the half-open cell door. "How did you get free?" she asked. "I decided to help myself," Jallu replied. "Where's Ben Skywalker?" "He said he was going ahead." Kadia lowered her saber. "To make a lawful arrest." Ben had gone ahead after telling Kadia to free the prisoners, but he hadn't gone alone. Bandy Geffer and Manisha were with him, and once they got clear of the chaotic, snarling Kissite pack, they made their way for Extirpator's Bridge. Ben hadn't been on this model starship before, but he knew the standard Imperial layout, and a half-size Star Destroyer had the same basic design as a full one. Nonetheless, the further they got from the hangar, the more time they took, the more they'd lose the element of surprise. Ben expected to face stiff opposition as soon as he reached the command deck, and that was what he got. When the three Jedi emerged from the final turbolift, the blast doors protecting the bridge were closing from all sides. Ben urged Bandy and Manisha onward. He didn't think he could stop the doors from closing with the Force, but he tried to slow their mechanism while sprinting, and also evading the laser blast pouring from the other side. It was hard multitasking, and one shot got past his waving lightsaber and scorched him in the shoulder. Another caught Manisha in the thigh and caused her to collapse. Ben couldn't stop, not for her, not for anyone, not when they were this close to ending it. He and Bandy held the blast doors open just wide enough to leap through. Once past the gate, they released their hold, and the doors slapped shut as soon as they hit the deck. Then came the really hard part. Extirpator was running well below peak crew capacity, but there were still close to 20 beings waiting for them on the bridge. They didn't have borrowed stormtrooper armor, but most of them had weapons, and they immediately began firing at the two Jedi. In situations like this, two knights against swarms of enemies, Ben and Bandy knew the best strategy. They had to stay together and jump into the middle of the fray, so the marauders were as likely to blast each other as the Jedi. That might or might not stay their hand, either way. Both men charged into the central aisle of the crew deck, where they stood back to back, covering each other as they deflected bolts left and right with their sabers. Ben did the best he could, but another bolt singed his elbow, and Bandy groaned as he took a hit. They couldn't defend against this man blast, this many enemies. In one corner of the bridge, a tall Saniasan in thick bronzium armor was shouting orders at the others, though said instructions amounted to little more than "kill him, you bloody bastards." Kreshik, he presumed. The marauders had a good chance of succeeding. Once more, Ben had pushed himself to the edge, his limits, and beyond. Now he was going to get himself killed, and other Jedi under his command. As he shifted to deflect two bolts, he remembered the weight of the bandolier. He was still wearing that thing, and it was still packed with all sorts of weird chemicals. He didn't know what any of them were, but he bet some of them were noxious and, just maybe, combustible. It was a stupid plan. It was his only plan. Ben shouted to Bandy into the pit. Now. Bandy didn't understand. That was okay. Ben back-kicked him and sent him into the crew pit on the starboard side. Ben jumped into the port side pit, right on top of a surly, shorter assassin with an old Imperial blaster pistol. He landed boots on the marauder's face, snatched the pistol from his flailing hand, then dropped his saber, grabbed the bandolier by its rim, and pulled it over his head. He threw it toward the ceiling in the center of the room. Then he shot it. All those weird chemicals packed together ignited at once. They actually exploded. The light was brief but blinding, and suddenly noxious fumes were scattered across the bridge. Ben had been prepared for it and tried to raise a protective bubble of air in the force, but even he started hacking. His eyes watered as he groped for his lightsaber, and found it. Then he pulled himself out of the crew pit onto the walkway. Still hacking, he wiped his eyes with his forearm and looked through the churning red-brown haze. He was in better shape than anyone else. Most of the crew were wheezing or pawing at their inflamed eyes. One giant Hulk was vomiting all over his console. Frankly, that had worked even better than he'd hoped. Ben spun around, looking for the captain. The blast doors began to open, and he saw one tall, bronze-armored figure lurch for the exit. Ben went after him as quickly as his wobble legs could allow. Both men were stricken by the fumes and nearly fell on top of each other, gasping, when they found the clearer air of the entrance corridor. The assassin knew he was being followed and tried to bring a blaster to bear, but Ben grabbed the barrel and pulled it from his hand. Then he shoved the captain hard in the chest, knocking him onto his back. Ben stood over him, ignited his lightsaber, and pointed it at the bronzium chestplate. "You're Kreshik, right?" The assassin coughed. "You're him, right, that carking Jedi prince. Luke Skywalker." "What?" Ben gogged. "You've won. Do it. Kill me?" Kreshik spread his arms, inviting a strike to the chest. "My luck's run out. Put me out of my misery." "I didn't come here to kill you," Ben said. "This is about getting justice done. You're under arrest." "Arrest? What are you? Space cops. You Jedi aren't in the Alliance." "Don't worry," Ben told him. "They'll be here soon enough." Because the planet Paradine lay outside Alliance jurisdiction, there were certain legal complications with the presence of the Corona-class frigate Restitution in orbit. However, given recent events, Paradine's Council of Cities was amenable to this surprise appearance. Kadia was assured as much by Sefton when she contacted him from orbit using Restitution's comm system. The Alliance ship had begun dispatching recovery crews to do what they could for Dogfight. Restitution was not a large ship, only half the size of Extirpator, but it didn't have much trouble holding the pirates to account, especially with their captain in custody. Subduing the Kissite running rampant throughout the ship was the harder part, but eventually that was accomplished as well. "What I'd like to know is, what are you going to do with the marauders now?" Kadia asked. She, and the rest of the Jedi, had been taken to Restitution's medical wing to patch their various hurts, and in Ben's case, to make sure he wasn't suffering any extra side effects from the amphistaff venom. Once everyone was settled in reclining med-scan chairs, which, she noted, were obscenely comfortable, they'd been joined by an Alliance officer who was apparently Ben's intelligence source for this mission. "We're not sure exactly, but the Justice Department will definitely pursue punishment for all Kreshik's crew," the woman said. She wore her dark hair in a short bob, and she'd introduced herself as Miranda, though a ship medic had called her Lieutenant Fardreamer. "How will that work, legally?" asked Bandy Jeffer from his chair. His left leg was going to need a cast for a while. All the stuff they've been doing with Extirpator has been outside Alliance territory. "Kreshik's been wanted by the Alliance for years on a lot of piracy charges," Fardreamer said. "Same with his second. They've only steered clear of us after they got their new ship." "Will they only be charged for those crimes?" Kadia asked. "Because they've bombed entire towns, and not just on Paradine. They've killed hundreds, maybe thousands." "I know." The lieutenant's face darkened. "The Alliance has procedures where non-member worlds can petition for arbitration. Usually it's opposing sides asking for a neutral judge, but I think they can be used to hold Kreshik and his people accountable for all they've done." "What will be happened to Extirpator?" asked Jallu, who was on her feet and healthy, minus a few bruises and cuts. Will you take it to Alliance space for salvage or repair? You'd have to install new hyperdrives. That will take a while to decide, and the final call is way above my head. For all we know, the Empire may request to have it returned. That'd be more trouble than it's worth, muttered Bandy. I think you should leave it here, Kadia said, for the people of Paradine to use, just in case they need to defend themselves again. Fardreamer frowned, but said diplomatically, like I said, that call isn't mine. You had enough pull to come out here and arrest them all, Bandy said. Your words got to count for something. It counts some, Fardreamer admitted, but I've only been with the Alliance a decade, and before that my record's spotty. Frankly, I think I pull more weight with your boss here. Her head, and everyone else's, turned to the corner of the room where Ben Skywalker sat with legs dangling over an examination bed while the hovering oval med droid finished applying antitoxin cream to the right side of his face, which was now swollen to an almost comical degree. When the droid drifted away, Ben said, indignant but slurred, I am not a Bosch. I'm not even a master. But this was your mission start to finish, Fardreamer said with a slight smile. I finished, but you started it. You came to me, telling me about this pirate with an old imp cruiser meshing around outside Alien Spash. I never told you to round up some Jedi and take on a huge warship with a dozen snub fighters. You didn't have to. Exactly. Because I knew that, of all the Jedi and all the beings in the galaxy, I could count on Ben Skywalker to do the right thing. Fardreamer was grinning now. Those two had history, and Kadia had to wonder what. Ben said, stop making fun of me. Besides, I was mission for middle of it. Jedi Jallu took charge. He gestured to the BIM. Shesh the one who's going to get made master. Jallu's long ears twitched. Really now? I talked to my father, Ben added. He flexed his jaw like he was trying to work around the swelling. He said, that it's time for you to rank up. A few Jedi applauded. Kadia joined in. Jallu waved a paw. It's only a title, she said, but she was smiling. You deserve it, Ben said seriously. You had to salvage the mess I made. Trying to take out a cruiser with a dozen Jedi was stupid. It got Reve killed, and we're lucky we didn't lose more. He lowered his head. I got too ambitious. People paid the price. I'm sorry. The room tipped toward sullen silence. Kadia tried to think of something besides cheap platitudes, but nothing came. Jallu cleared her throat. This mission was successful. Marauders who have killed hundreds, and would have killed hundreds more, have been stopped. We have helped the helpless. And you've said yourself, this is what Jedi are meant to do. We could have done better, Ben said. One can always do better. That is why every experience is a learning one, and some lessons are harder than others. Ben seemed to consider her words, but instead of replying, he pushed off his bed, landed feet on the deck, and said, I need to clear my head. I'll see you all later. Ben wove around the medical chairs and brushed past Kadia without a glance, though he slowed to clap Lieutenant Fardreamer on the shoulder. Then he left and walked out of the medical bay, down Restitution's plain white corridor. Something impelled Kadia to go after him. She followed him at a slow trot and came up beside him on his left flank, so she saw only the unblemished half of his face. It was a nice face, she thought, a face that belonged on the Jedi Order's new poster boy. If only she could do something about his downcast expression. She's right, you know, Kadia said. We did a good thing. We lost some people, yes, but it could have been a lot worse. That's the point, Ben said, staring ahead. If you hadn't bailed me out down there, I'd have died in those jungles and we'd have never taken extirpator either. So you're saying I'm the reason the mission succeeded? His angry stride faltered. Maybe. Funny. She forced a laugh. Here I thought you were the one who bailed me out after my dumb distraction scheme almost ruined the whole op. Well, if it weren't for me, you might have knocked out the cruiser on the first go. Then we wouldn't have lost anyone. Not Reve, not all those people on Dogfight. Ben stopped and put a hand on her shoulder. Okay, there's plenty of blame to go around, and if we want to feel bad, we can always find a reason. That's what you're saying, right? More or less, she said, because she did feel bad for Dogfight, and always would. He sighed. I like it when we blame everything, good and bad, on the will of the Force. That's easier, isn't it? Master Luke called that a cop-out. She's probably right. I guess, after all this time, I thought I'd stop feeling like I'm in training and start feeling like a real Jedi. Does that happen to anyone? According to my dad, no. That surprised her. For some reason, she thought the great Luke Skywalker would be exempt from the rules that confounded every other Jedi. Of course, she'd assumed that about his son, too. It turned out they were all mortal, with mortal failures, mortal doubts, frivolous mortal worries. As they walked along, slower now, heading nowhere specific, Kadia asked, "How do you know Lieutenant Fardreamer?" Miranda. "Oh, it's a long story. She stole my lightsaber once." "What? Why?" "Like I said, long story." "How long?" "About 10 years, I guess." He glanced at her. "Why?" She looked away. "Nothing. You seemed like good friends. We run into each other now and then. We do each other favors. And it's good to have friends in the Alliance. The Jedi need more of them. It's one of the reasons I put this mission together." They kept walking. Kadia said, "I'm glad you did. Because we did a good thing here." "I know." And she willed herself to say it. "I'm glad I got to meet you." Ben kept walking, eyes ahead. "I'm glad I met you too." They walked a little more. Then he asked, "Any idea what you'll do now?" "I'm waiting on my next assignment." "I guess I am too. Maybe we deserve a vacation after this." "I didn't think Jedi got vacations." "We don't technically. I've bothered my dad about that. He says the Order doesn't allow time off, but we make up for it with a great medical plan." She smiled, glad he could make jokes. They rounded a corner, passing a pair of Alliance officers in blue. Then Ben asked her, "When's the next Rainbow Festival on Kujiker?" "In my hometown. 5 standard months." "You keep track?" "Yes," she admitted. "Is your family still there?" "They are." She was reminded again about Ben's own fraught clan. He said, "You should make plans and go to them. If you love something that much, you shouldn't keep away from it." "Jedi don't get vacations." "No, but we can make them now and then, for something important." They walked a little more, now at a slow and comfortable pace. She asked him, "Where would you go if you took a vacation?" He arched his head back and watched the ceiling. "I don't know. I don't think I have a private place like you do, one separate from the Order. The Jedi are my life. Always have been, always will be." There was regret in his voice, though faint. Kadia had the urge to take his hand and give an assuring squeeze, but reined it in. Instead, she sent a little warmth through the Force and a smile. "Look on the bright side," she said. "If you're always part of the Jedi, it means you're not alone. And you never will be." He looked at her thoughtfully. "I guess you're right. So, does that mean we should head back to the med bay and let the others know I'm not feeling mad or mopey anymore?" "Not if you don't want to." "Good," he said. "I want to just keep walking for a while. Miranda said there's an observation room a couple decks down. I think I want to look at this planet we saved when I'm not fighting for my life. Just look at it." "I can't go back if you want to be alone." "Didn't you just say I was never alone?" He smiled faintly. "It's fine. You can't do whatever you'd like." Kadia slowed, but Ben kept walking ahead. She watched his back for a second, wondering if she should leave him to think his own thoughts in private because he was, after all, the Jedi Order's heir and wonder boy, and his problems were way beyond her. But they weren't, and neither was he. Strange to think, but as she told him once, the Force was a constant supply of miracles. "All right," she said. "I'll come with you."